When I paid $80,000 for my sister's wedding, her new husband looked me in the eye and told me to sit with the guests because I was not real family. A week later, he called me demanding the honeymoon money. I just laughed and asked him, "Did I not tell you? My name is Simone. I am 33 years old and a self-made wealth manager living in Atlanta." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who took your hard work and generosity for granted. The crystal chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton Atlanta cast a golden glow over the grand ballroom. It was a picture-perfect evening, the kind of luxurious event that makes it onto the pages of high society bridal magazines. I sat at the head table sipping sparkling water and observing the absolute opulence that surrounded me. The room was a sea of designer gowns, custom-tailored tuxedos, and vibrant floral arrangements of imported white orchids and roses that cascaded down every table. A 12-piece live band was playing soft jazz in the corner, and waiters in white gloves circulated the room carrying silver trays of champagne and high-end hors d'oeuvres. Every single detail in this room, from the hand-lettered gold foil place cards to the massive ice sculpture centerpiece at the open bar, existed for one reason only. I had opened my checkbook and paid for it. My younger sister Jasmine was the bride, and in our family she was the golden child. She was a former sorority queen who had spent her entire life obsessed with maintaining a flawless image on social media. When she got engaged to Kendrick, a man who called himself a cryptocurrency entrepreneur but never seemed to actually work, my mother Valerie made it clear that Jasmine deserved the wedding of the century. And since my mother had no money and Kendrick was supposedly tying up his capital in investments, the financial burden fell entirely on me. I sat quietly at the VIP table dressed in an elegant emerald green gown. My mother Valerie sat to my right, engaged in a deep conversation with Pastor Davis from our family church. Valerie looked radiant in a silver dress, laughing and soaking up the compliments from passing guests who congratulated her on raising such a beautiful bride. Not once did she mention that I had single-handedly saved the wedding from being canceled when Kendrick's credit cards were repeatedly declined by the catering company 3 months prior. I had stepped in and paid the $80,000 balance in full directly to the vendors just to stop my mother from crying and to ensure my sister had her special day. Jasmine was out on the dance floor spinning around in her custom silk gown, surrounded by her sorority sisters. Kendrick was standing near the bar with 3 of his fraternity brothers. They were all holding expensive glasses of top-shelf scotch, laughing loudly, and acting like they owned the city of Atlanta. I watched Kendrick slap one of his groomsmen on the back before pointing toward the head table. He handed his drink to a friend and began walking over to where I was sitting. He approached the VIP table with a swagger that irritated me immediately. He adjusted the lapels of his velvet tuxedo jacket, leaned over the table, and tapped his champagne flute with a silver fork to get my attention. Pastor Davis looked up, smiling politely. My mother stopped talking and beamed at her new son-in-law. Simone, Kendrick said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "This table is for actual family and the people who built this union. Can you go sit at table 15 near the kitchen? We have an uncle on my side who just arrived and he needs your seat." I stopped with my water glass halfway to my mouth. I slowly lowered it back to the table and looked at him, waiting for the punchline of a terrible joke. But Kendrick was not smiling. He stared down at me with a smug, arrogant expression. "Excuse me?" I said quietly, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You heard me," Kendrick replied, crossing his arms over his chest. "This VIP section is strictly for real family members. You are not real family anyway. Your dad walked out on you ages ago, and you do not even share the same father as Jasmine. So do me a favor, pick up your purse and go to table 15. Let the actual family celebrate." The utter disrespect hung in the air like thick smoke. Table 15 was located in the far back corner of the ballroom, right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen, where the waitstaff rushed in and out with dirty dishes. He was publicly humiliating me in front of the pastor and the elite guests of Atlanta, trying to assert his dominance as the alpha male of the family. I turned my head to look at my mother. I fully expected Valerie to gasp to scold him to remind him exactly who was funding the extravagant party he was currently enjoying. Instead, my mother reached over and patted Kendrick on the arm affectionately. "Simone, just listen to him," Valerie said, her voice dripping with annoyance as she looked at me. "Do not make a scene. This is Jasmine's big day, and Kendrick is the man of the hour. You know how stressed he has been. Just take your plate and go sit where he asked you to sit. Stop being so difficult." Pastor Davis cleared his throat and looked down at his napkin, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, but he chose to say nothing. A cold, sharp realization washed over me. I looked at my mother, who was glaring at me as if I were a misbehaving child. I looked at Kendrick, who was smirking, clearly enjoying the power trip of kicking the wealthy sister out of the VIP section. For 33 years, I had allowed this family to treat me like a human ATM. I had bought my mother's cars. I had paid off Jasmine's credit card debt. I had funded this $80,000 wedding because I wanted to buy the love and acceptance that I was never given growing up. I took a deep breath, refusing to shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice, but my words were sharp enough to cut glass. "Kendrick," I said, leaning back in my chair and making direct eye contact with him, "the chair you are asking me to vacate costs $500 a plate. In fact, the velvet jacket you are wearing, the top-shelf scotch you were just drinking with your fraternity brothers, and the ice sculpture behind you exists solely because I wrote the check. Jasmine contributed absolutely nothing to this wedding, and neither did you." Kendrick's face hardened, his smug smile faltering for a split second before his ego took over again. "Do not sit here and lie in front of the pastor," he scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "I am a successful investor. I paid for my own wedding. You just helped out with a few minor details because Jasmine felt sorry for you being single. Now get up before I have the security team escort you out of my reception." My mother gasped dramatically and grabbed my wrist. "Simone, that is enough," she hissed. "You are embarrassing us. You always have to make everything about money. Just because you have a successful business does not give you the right to disrespect the head of this new household. Move to table 15 right now, or you can leave." I looked at my mother's hand gripping my wrist. I gently but firmly pulled my arm away. The illusion of family loyalty shattered completely in that moment. They did not love me. They only loved what I could provide for them. And the moment they got what they wanted, they were ready to discard me to the back of the room near the kitchen doors. "You are right, Mother," I said calmly, standing up from my chair and smoothing the front of my gown. "I do not want to embarrass the family. And Kendrick, you are absolutely right. Guests should not sit at the VIP table." Kendrick smirked again, assuming he had won. He stepped back and gestured toward the back of the ballroom. "Thank you. Table 15 is right by the exit." I picked up my designer clutch and my phone. I looked Pastor Davis directly in the eye and gave him a polite nod. "Have a blessed evening, Pastor," I said. I stepped away from the head table, but I did not walk toward table 15. I turned my back on Kendrick and my mother, ignoring their confused whispers. I walked with my head held high, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. I walked past the massive floral centerpieces, past the live band playing their soft jazz, and past the open bar where the fraternity brothers were still laughing. I walked straight out of the grand ballroom and down the carpeted hallway of the Ritz-Carlton, heading directly for the main event coordination office. The banquet manager, a tall professional man named Julian, who had worked closely with me for the past 3 months to organize the payments, was standing near the doorway reviewing a clipboard. "Julian." I called out, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. He looked up and smiled warmly. "Miss Simone, the ballroom looks spectacular. Is everything to your liking?" "Everything was lovely," I replied, stopping in front of him and opening my clutch. I pulled out my heavy black American Express card and held it between my fingers. "But there has been a slight change in the evening's arrangements. I have just been informed by the groom that I am merely a guest at this wedding and not considered part of the family." Julian frowned, his professional demeanor slipping into genuine confusion. "I am so sorry to hear that, Miss Simone. Is there anything I can do?" "Yes," I said, handing him the black card. "Since I am only a guest, I will no longer be sponsoring the premium open bar. I also want to immediately cancel the VIP catering tab reserved for the groom and his fraternity brothers, as well as the late-night seafood buffet scheduled for midnight. I am closing my account right now. Julian stared at the card, then looked up at me, his eyes widening as he realized the magnitude of what I was asking. Miss Simone, the open bar tab alone is already approaching $15,000. If I close your account, the venue will require immediate payment from the groom to keep the alcohol flowing and to serve the remaining premium courses. I offered him a sweet, perfectly calm smile. I know. Please transfer the outstanding balance to Kendrick's name. Let him know that the venue requires his credit card immediately. I'm going home. Julian hesitated for only a fraction of a second before his professional training kicked in. He nodded, taking the black American Express card from my hand. He walked over to the payment terminal at his desk, processed the cancellation of the open tab, and printed out a long, detailed receipt. The machine hummed as it produced the paper that represented $15,000 of top-shelf liquor, imported caviar, and hand-rolled cigars. Julian handed me my card back along with a copy of the finalized zero balance for my account. He then picked up the new invoice, the one bearing Kendrick's name. I stood near the grand entrance of the ballroom, partially concealed by a massive arrangement of white hydrangeas. I wanted to witness the exact moment the illusion shattered. Inside, the jazz band had paused. The room fell into a respectful silence as Kendrick took the microphone, standing in the center of the dance floor. He had a fresh glass of champagne in his hand. Jasmine was clinging to his arm, looking up at him with total adoration, her heavy silk train fanned out perfectly across the polished wood. I want to raise a glass to my beautiful wife, Kendrick announced, his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. And to my brothers, the men who know what it takes to build an empire. We do not just dream, we execute. Tonight is about celebrating success, family, and the legacy we are creating. Drink up, everyone. The bar is wide open and the night is young. The crowd cheered, glasses clinked, but right as Kendrick raised his flute to take a sip, Julian stepped onto the dance floor. The banquet manager moved with urgent discretion, bypassing the bridesmaids and tapping Kendrick lightly on the shoulder. Kendrick lowered his glass, looking annoyed at the interruption. He leaned down as Julian whispered something in his ear. From my vantage point, the physical transformation was spectacular. Kendrick's arrogant smile vanished instantly, his posture stiffened. He shook his head violently and pointed a finger toward the VIP table, clearly instructing Julian to charge my card. Julian simply shook his head and handed Kendrick the long printed invoice. Even from a distance, I could see the blood drain from Kendrick's face. "Excuse me," Kendrick said into the microphone, forgetting to pull it away from his mouth. "What do you mean the tab is closed? The sister paid for this." The microphone caught every word. A collective murmur rippled through the ballroom. Guests exchanged confused glances. Jasmine snatched the microphone from his hand, her perfect smile faltering as she looked at Julian. "What is going on?" she demanded, her voice shrill and entirely unsuited for the elegant setting. "Why is the manager bothering us during the toast?" Julian, maintaining his utmost professionalism, spoke loudly enough for the front row of tables to hear. "Ma'am, the original financial sponsor for the evening has formally withdrawn her card. The venue policy requires an active credit card on file to continue serving alcohol and to release the midnight catering spread. The current outstanding balance for the bar is $14,850. I need a payment method right now, sir, or I have to instruct my staff to shut down the bar." The fraternity brothers standing nearby suddenly looked very uncomfortable. One of them slowly put his half-empty glass of scotch down on a cocktail table and took a step back. The guests at the VIP table, including Pastor Davis, stared in absolute stunned silence. Jasmine snatched the invoice out of Kendrick's hand. Her eyes widened as she read the total. She looked frantically toward the VIP table, searching for me. "Where is Simone?" she shrieked, entirely, dropping the poised, elegant bride persona she had cultivated for her social media followers. "Mom, where did Simone go? She cannot do this to me. This is my wedding." My mother shot up from her chair, her face flushed with a mixture of rage and panic. She looked around the room, her eyes darting toward the exits. She spotted me standing near the floral arrangement by the door. I did not hide. I simply gave her a small, polite wave, turned on my heel, and walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the hotel lobby. I could hear the chaos erupting behind me. Jasmine began wailing, a full-blown toddler meltdown disguised in a $20,000 custom silk dress. I heard her screaming at Kendrick to fix it, demanding that he pull out his black card and pay the man. But I knew Kendrick did not have a black card. He did not even have a platinum card. Everything he owned was leveraged, borrowed, or rented. Simone, wait right there. I kept walking my pace, steady and unbothered. I reached the grand lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, where the crystal chandeliers hung low and the marble floors reflected the soft evening light. The valet stand was just outside the heavy glass doors. I pushed through them, the warm Atlanta night air washing over me. "Valet, please," I said to the attendant, handing him my ticket. "The black Porsche Panamera." "Right away, ma'am," he replied, jogging toward the parking garage. Before I could even take a deep breath, the heavy glass doors burst open behind me. My mother came charging out, her silver dress catching the light, her face twisted in absolute fury. She was breathing heavily, having sprinted through the hotel lobby in her expensive heels. "What is wrong with you?" Valerie screamed, not caring that the hotel doorman and a few passing pedestrians were staring at her. "How dare you pull a stunt like this? Get back in there right now and give that manager your credit card. You are humiliating your sister in front of the entire church congregation. The elders are in there. Pastor Davis is in there. What will people say about our family?" I turned to face her, completely unfazed by her screaming. I crossed my arms and looked her up and down. "They will say that Kendrick threw a wonderful party he could not afford. That is not my problem, Mother." "You are evil," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You have always been jealous of Jasmine. Just because no man wants to marry you, you have to ruin her special day. Kendrick was just stressed out. He is the man of the house now, and you need to respect his authority. He just wanted his family to sit with him." "He told me I was not family," I reminded her smoothly. "He told me I was just a guest, and as far as I know, guests do not pay the catering bill. Guests do not drop $80,000 to make sure the bride has imported orchids. Guests eat their free meal, drink their free wine, and go home. So that is exactly what I am doing." Valerie stepped closer, trying to use her physical presence to intimidate me, a tactic she had used since I was a little girl. "You are going to regret this, Simone. If you leave right now, do not ever call me again. Do not bother coming to Sunday dinner. You are cutting yourself off from your own flesh and blood over a petty disagreement about seating." I looked at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had watched her new son-in-law degrade me publicly and chose to defend him instead of her own daughter. The realization was incredibly freeing. I was not losing a mother, I was losing a parasite. "I will not be calling," I said quietly, "and I will not be at Sunday dinner. You and Kendrick can figure out how to pay the bill. He is a successful investor, right? He builds empires. 14 grand should be pocket change for a man like him." The roar of an engine interrupted her next insult. The valet pulled my sleek black Porsche smoothly into the driveway, stepping out and opening the driver's side door for me. I handed him a crisp $20 bill as a tip. Valerie realized I was actually leaving. Her anger quickly dissolved into desperation. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her. "Simone, please," she begged, her voice cracking as she grabbed the handle of my car door to stop me from closing it. "You cannot leave them like this. They will stop the party. They will lock the bar. Kendrick's money is tied up in the crypto market right now. He cannot liquidate it tonight. The venue is going to call the police if we do not settle the tab. Please just pay it. I will make him apologize to you tomorrow, I promise." I looked at her hand clutching my door handle. "Let go of my car, Mother. Simone, I am begging you." I reached out and peeled her fingers off the handle one by one. "I am not an ATM, Valerie. Enjoy the tap water." I pulled the door shut, locking it immediately. Through the tinted glass, I watched my mother standing on the curb, her face buried in her hands, crying tears of sheer panic. I started the engine, the powerful purr of the Porsche vibrating through the seat. I shifted into drive and pulled smoothly out of the Ritz-Carlton driveway, merging onto the busy streets of downtown Atlanta. The city lights blurred past me, casting neon reflections across the dashboard. For the first time in my life, I felt a profound, undeniable sense of peace. The heavy, suffocating weight of my family's expectations had finally been lifted. I turned on the radio, letting the smooth rhythm of an old-school track fill the cabin, drowning out the lingering memory of my mother's screaming. Back inside the ballroom, the nightmare I had orchestrated was reaching its absolute peak. My phone sat in the passenger seat, the screen lighting up repeatedly with frantic text messages and missed calls from Jasmine, my mother, and eventually Kendrick himself. I ignored them all, but my imagination painted a vivid, highly satisfying picture of the scene unfolding at the venue. I knew exactly what was happening. Kendrick, sweating through his velvet tuxedo jacket, would be frantically swiping every card in his leather wallet at Julian's payment terminal. I could picture the little red decline messages flashing on the screen one after another. Decline, insufficient funds, please contact your bank. The fraternity brothers who just moments ago were cheering to his fake wealth and success would be slowly backing away, suddenly checking their phones and pretending they had somewhere else to be. The bartender would be placing white towels over the beer taps and locking the top-shelf liquor cabinets right in front of the thirsty guests. Jasmine would be sobbing in the bridal suite, her perfect makeup ruined, realizing that the man she married was entirely broke. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an automated text message from my credit card company confirming that the hold on my account had been formally released and the funds had been returned. I smiled, tapping the steering wheel to the beat of the music. Kendrick thought he could take my money, elevate himself, and publicly discard me all in the same breath. He thought my desire for family connection made me weak and compliant. He was dead wrong. I was a wealth manager. I spent my days analyzing risk-protecting assets and liquidating bad investments. Tonight, I had simply liquidated the worst investment of my entire life. As I drove toward my quiet, peaceful home, I knew this was only the beginning. The humiliation at the Ritz-Carlton was just the first domino to fall. My family had spent years taking advantage of my kindness, but they were about to learn a very hard lesson about my boundaries. The catering bill was merely a warning shot. The real reckoning was still to come, and I was entirely ready for the war. Exactly 1 week passed since the catastrophic reception at the Ritz-Carlton. I did not hear a single word from my mother, my sister, or her new husband. They did not call to apologize for the humiliation they tried to inflict. They did not text to explain themselves. They simply vanished into absolute silence. They assumed freezing me out would force me to crawl back begging for forgiveness. It was their favorite psychological tactic. Growing up, whenever I stepped out of line, questioned their authority, or refused to fund Jasmine's extravagant whims, my mother would ignore me for weeks. She would look right through me as if I was invisible, until the guilt became too heavy to bear. But things were different now. The silence did not feel oppressive anymore. It felt like a much-needed vacation. I spent the entire week focused entirely on my firm. My downtown Atlanta wealth management office was a pristine sanctuary of order, logic, and success, located on the 40th floor of a sleek glass skyscraper. The panoramic view of the sprawling city skyline served as a quiet reminder of how far I had climbed entirely on my own merits. I was sitting at my custom mahogany desk, deeply engrossed in reviewing a complex quarterly portfolio for a prominent high-net-worth client, when the silver phone on my console began to ring. I glanced at the glowing caller ID. It was Kendrick. For a brief second, I considered letting the call go straight to voicemail, but my curiosity about his sheer audacity won the mental debate. I pressed the speakerphone button, crossed my legs, and leaned back in my executive chair. "Hello, Kendrick," I said, my voice smooth, calm, and professionally detached. "Simone," he barked through the speaker, sounding exceptionally rushed and agitated, completely ignoring any basic pleasantries. "Listen to me very closely. Jasmine and I are currently finalizing our packing at the apartment. We fly out tomorrow morning for the Maldives. I am looking at my banking app right now, and the $25,000 honeymoon fund you promised us has not hit my checking account yet. You need to wire that money to me immediately." I stared at the phone sitting on my desk, genuinely amazed by his profound level of delusion. He was speaking to me as if the spectacular disaster at his wedding reception had never happened. He was acting like a disappointed project manager demanding an overdue financial report, rather than a man who had publicly degraded his primary benefactor and then immediately suffered the severe financial consequences of his own arrogance. Kendrick, I replied calmly, keeping my tone perfectly level. Are you seriously calling my corporate office right now after what you pulled last Saturday night to demand $25,000 in liquid cash? Do not start with the unnecessary drama today, Simone. He snapped back quickly, his voice dripping with intense condescension. Jasmine has been crying hysterically all week because you selfishly ruined her reception. I had to pull massive favors with my important business partners just to cover the bar tab you maliciously abandoned. You absolutely owe us this money. You explicitly promised us a luxury honeymoon experience, and as a strong man who provides for his beautiful wife, I need to make absolutely sure those funds are secured in my name before we board that flight. Send the wire right now. His ability to completely rewrite reality was almost impressive to witness. He was skillfully painting himself as both the tragic victim and the conquering hero simultaneously. I let out a soft, dry, humorless chuckle that reverberated slightly in the quiet office. I owe you absolutely nothing, I said. You made it perfectly clear to everyone in that ballroom that I am not family. I am just a random guest. And regular guests do not wire $25,000 to the groom a week after the wedding. You know what your actual problem is? Kendrick's voice grew significantly louder, echoing harshly off the thick glass walls of my private office. You are deeply bitter. You are so profoundly jealous of Jasmine that you simply cannot stand to see her happy and thriving. You might have all this money sitting in the bank, but you do not have a man to love you. You do not have a real family of your own. We are desperately trying to include you. We are trying our absolute hardest to let you be a meaningful part of our lives, but you keep pushing us away with your toxic and controlling behavior. I remained silent calmly, letting his desperate tantrum burn through the phone speaker. He took my silence as a sign of weakness and submission, so he pushed even harder aggressively, deploying the ultimate emotional weapon. Let me make this very clear to you, Simone. He threatened, his tone suddenly turning dark, cold, and icy. If that money is not sitting securely in my account by 5 o'clock this evening, you are completely done. You will be permanently and irreversibly banned from this family. When Jasmine and I start having children, you will never be allowed to meet your future nieces or nephews. You will never be invited to a single holiday dinner, birthday party, or cookout ever again. You will sit in that fancy sterile office all by yourself and grow old completely alone. Send the wire by 5 o'clock or consider yourself cut off forever. He paused, waiting for the familiar guilt to crush my spirit, waiting for me to panic at the thought of losing my sister's future children. He expected me to cave, to pull out my checkbook and buy my way back into their graces. Instead, I leaned forward over my mahogany desk and laughed. It was not a small, polite chuckle. It was a genuine, deep belly laugh that echoed loudly through the room. Are you quite done? I asked casually, wiping a stray tear of amusement from my eye. What is so funny? He demanded, his voice cracking slightly with sudden insecurity. Didn't I tell you? I asked, softly dropping the volume of my voice so he had to strain his ears to hear me properly. Didn't I tell you directly at the reception that I pay for things directly? You really thought I was going to wire $25,000 of liquid cash directly into your personal checking account? I paid the luxury travel agency directly, Kendrick. I booked the expensive flights. I booked the beautiful overwater bungalow. I paid for the private seaplane transfer. The entire luxury trip was fully funded, confirmed, and completely secured over 3 weeks ago. I heard a very sharp, sudden intake of breath on the other end of the line, but I did not stop there. I pulled up a confidential file on my computer monitor, glancing at the notes my assistant had compiled. And I know exactly what you did on Tuesday morning, I continued, my voice slicing through his stunned silence. You boldly called the luxury travel agency. You pretended to represent me citing a fake family emergency, and you actively tried to cancel the entire itinerary. You aggressively demanded that the $25,000 be refunded, but not to the original credit card. You demanded it be securely routed directly into your personal cryptocurrency trading account. You literally tried to steal your own honeymoon money just to cover your hidden debts. The silence on the other end of the phone was absolute and deafening. The senior travel agent is a close personal friend of mine, Kendrick, I said, thoroughly enjoying every single second of his rapid unraveling. She flagged your cancellation request immediately. She told me you cursed at her when she refused to reroute the refund, so I went ahead and made a final executive decision for you. Since you wanted to cancel the trip so badly to get the cash, I authorized the official cancellation myself. You did what Kendrick yelled, his voice reflecting pure panic. The honeymoon is canceled, I said cheerfully, tapping a pen against my desk. The flights are gone. The bungalow is gone. The money was refunded to my corporate account yesterday. You have absolutely nothing, Kendrick exploded. A rapid barrage of vile profanity poured through the speaker. You bitter, lonely, miserable woman, he screamed at the top of his lungs. You are nothing but a jealous and pathetic wretch. I reached out and tapped the red button on the console, cutting off his raging voice mid-sentence. The spacious office was blissfully quiet again. I took a deep, refreshing breath, feeling lighter than I had in several years. I picked up my pen, completely ready to return to my important portfolio review, when the intercom on my desk buzzed abruptly, shattering the peaceful silence. Yes, I answered smoothly. Miss Simone, my receptionist said, her voice tight with panic. Your mother is here in the lobby and she brought a lawyer. Before I could even instruct my receptionist to call security, the heavy glass door to my private office swung open with tremendous force. My mother, Valerie, marched into the room with a theatrical sense of righteous fury. Right behind her was a man who looked like he had just stepped out of a late-night television commercial for ambulance chasers. He was wearing a poorly tailored pinstripe suit that bunched awkwardly at the shoulders, an excessively shiny gold watch, and a smug smirk that suggested he thought he was walking into an easy payday. My mother slammed her designer handbag down on one of my leather guest chairs, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. This is him, Valerie announced loudly, her voice echoing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. This is my attorney, Mr. Sterling. And we are not leaving this office until you take responsibility for the absolute disaster you caused our family. I did not stand up. I did not offer them a seat. I simply folded my hands on top of my mahogany desk and stared at the flashy lawyer. Mr. Sterling puffed out his chest, stepped forward, and dramatically tossed a thick manila folder onto the center of my desk. It landed with a heavy, pretentious thud. Miss Simone. The lawyer began, using a tone that was entirely too loud for the intimate office space. My client is officially serving you with notice of impending litigation. We are filing a lawsuit against you for promissory estoppel. You made a clear verbal agreement to provide financial sponsorship for Jasmine and Kendrick's wedding and their subsequent honeymoon. By maliciously withdrawing those funds at the final hour, you breached that verbal contract, causing severe emotional distress and catastrophic financial damages to my clients. I looked at the manila folder, then back at Mr. Sterling. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from bursting into laughter. As a wealth manager, I dealt with corporate attorneys, federal regulators, and high-stakes financial litigation on a daily basis. The idea that this strip mall lawyer thought he could intimidate me with a frivolous civil claim over a wedding dispute was deeply comical. Promissory estoppel, I repeated slowly, letting the legal term hang in the air. You are suing me for changing my mind about giving my sister a gift. Good luck proving a verbal contract for a gift without a single piece of signed documentation. My legal team will have this thrown out of court before the judge even finishes their morning coffee. Valerie stepped forward, shoving the lawyer aside. She slammed her hands flat on my desk, her face inches from mine. You think you are so smart, Simone? She yelled, her voice vibrating with genuine rage. You think because you sit in this fancy high-rise and wear expensive clothes that you can just destroy people's lives without any consequences. Do you have any idea what you have done to us? Do you know what I had to do to save Jasmine's marriage? I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression entirely neutral. Please enlighten me, Valerie. What did you do to save a marriage that has only existed for 7 days? My mother's anger suddenly dissolved into a spectacular display of professional victimhood. Her eyes welled up with tears. Her lower lip began to quiver. It was the exact same performance she used at church whenever she needed sympathy from the congregation. She grabbed a tissue from her purse and dabbed dramatically at her eyes. Kendrick is a brilliant crypto investor, Valerie sobbed, her voice breaking. He is building a massive digital portfolio that is going to secure our family's future for generations. But his business capital is currently tied up in restricted offshore accounts. He could not liquidate his assets in time to pay the $15,000 bar tab you spitefully dumped on him. The Ritz-Carlton was threatening to have him arrested for theft of services on his own wedding night. She paused, letting out a loud, shuddering breath. To keep my son-in-law out of jail, and to save Jasmine from absolute humiliation, I had to step in. I had to take out a $100,000 mortgage on my house. I gave Kendrick the money so he could pay the venue cover, the bounce checks for the floral arrangements, and secure their new apartment. You forced me to mortgage my home, Simone. You put my financial security at risk because of your petty, vindictive jealousy. The air in my office suddenly went entirely still. The amusement I felt just moments ago vanished, completely replaced by the sharp, cold clarity of a financial predator spotting a wounded animal. My professional instincts kicked into high gear. The numbers immediately stopped making sense. I looked at my mother, searching her face for any sign that she was lying, but she was telling the truth as she understood it. She had actually mortgaged her house. The house that belonged to my late grandmother, the only piece of real estate our family had owned free and clear for 3 decades. She had handed over the equity to a man she barely knew. Let me make sure I'm hearing this correctly, I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. You took out a $100,000 mortgage on Grandma's house. The bar tab was $15,000. Where is the rest of the money, Valerie? Mr. Sterling puffed his chest out again. That is none of your concern, he interrupted. Kendrick is a seasoned entrepreneur. He is utilizing the remaining funds to leverage new investments that will pay the mortgage back tenfold. The point is, your malicious actions forced your mother into a position of extreme financial duress, and we expect you to settle this lawsuit by paying off the entire mortgage immediately plus damages. My mind raced. Kendrick was not a crypto genius. He was a classic textbook con artist. He had expertly executed an affinity scam using his new marriage to Jasmine to gain my mother's absolute trust. He had used the chaos of the wedding night, the very chaos I had caused by canceling my credit card, as the perfect high-pressure leverage to panic Valerie into giving him a massive lump sum of cash. He had successfully convinced my mother that his lack of liquid capital was my fault, completely distracting her from the simple fact that a real investor would never need a grandmother's home equity to cover a bar tab. If I fought them right now, if I kicked them out of my office and told my high-powered lawyers to destroy Mr. Sterling in court, I would win the case easily. But winning the case would not expose Kendrick. It would just make my mother double down on her blind loyalty to him. If I wanted to completely dismantle Kendrick's web of lies, I needed hard data. I needed paper trails. I needed the receipts. I took a deep breath, consciously softening my facial expression. I let my shoulders slump just a fraction, projecting the exact image of a defeated daughter who had suddenly realized she went too far. I looked down at my desk, then back up at my mother, forcing a look of mild panic into my eyes. I had no idea I lied smoothly, my voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. I swear to you, Valerie, I did not know it would escalate to this level. I was just angry about the seating arrangement. I never intended for you to put your house on the line. Grandma loved that house. I would never want to put her legacy at risk. Valerie's posture immediately shifted. The righteous fury melted into triumphant satisfaction. She thought she had won. She thought the threat of a lawsuit and the heavy burden of family guilt had successfully broken my resistance. She crossed her arms, looking down at me with supreme arrogance. Actions have consequences, Simone, she said condescendingly. You cannot just throw your weight around and expect us to bow down. Now you have to fix this mess. I turned to the lawyer, maintaining my carefully constructed facade of cooperation. Mr. Sterling, I said softly, a public lawsuit would be disastrous for my wealth management firm. If my clients found out I was being sued by my own mother for promissory estoppel, it would ruin my professional reputation. I want to settle this quietly. The lawyer's eyes lit up with unadulterated greed. He could already taste his contingency fee. We are certainly open to discussing a private settlement, Miss Simone, assuming the terms are highly favorable to my client. I will pay off the entire mortgage, I said, watching Valerie's eyes widen with shock and delight. I will clear the $100,000 debt completely. But since I am a licensed financial professional, my compliance department requires me to keep meticulous records of all major familial debt settlements. I cannot just hand you a random check. I need to review the original mortgage origination documents, the loan disclosures, and the specific routing numbers where the bank dispersed the funds. I just need to verify the exact payoff amount to the penny. Mr. Sterling nodded eagerly, entirely missing the trap I was setting. That is standard procedure. We can certainly provide those documents to facilitate the settlement. Valerie smiled a genuine glowing smile of absolute victory. She actually thought she had outsmarted a woman who managed billion-dollar portfolios for a living. I knew you would finally see reason, she said, her tone dripping with fake maternal warmth. We are family, Simone. We are supposed to look out for each other. Kendrick will be very relieved to hear that you are finally stepping up to support his vision. Do you have the documents with you? I asked Mr. Sterling, ignoring my mother's nauseating speech. The lawyer quickly opened his briefcase, fumbling excitedly through his chaotic papers. He pulled out a thick stack of stapled documents and slid them across my desk. Here is the copy of the mortgage agreement your mother signed with the lender, including the disbursement instructions for the $100,000. Review them with your compliance team, and I will expect a call from you by tomorrow morning to finalize the wire transfer. I placed my hand firmly over the stack of papers. You will have my answer very soon, Mr. Sterling. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Valerie, I will be in touch. My mother adjusted her designer handbag, looking incredibly smug. Do not take too long, Simone. Kendrick has very important investments waiting. She turned on her heel and walked out of my office, her cheap lawyer scurrying right behind her like an obedient dog. The moment the heavy glass door clicked shut, the fake panic instantly vanished from my face. My heart was pounding against my ribs, driven by pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I spun my chair around to face my computer monitors. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with practiced speed and precision. I did not need to wait for my compliance team. I had direct access to the county clerk's private real estate database and the public property records portal. I opened the mortgage document Mr. Sterling had just given me, scanning for the loan origination number and the property parcel identification code. I typed the numbers into the search bar of the county database and hit enter. The system loaded for 2 excruciating seconds before the official deed and lien history for my grandmother's house appeared on the screen. I scrolled past the historical data, bypassing decades of clean ownership until I reached the newest entry filed just 5 days ago. I read the name of the lending institution. I read the exact loan amount. And then I read the designated disbursement account where the $100,000 had been sent. My blood ran completely cold. The room seemed to shrink around me as the horrific magnitude of Kendrick's deception materialized on the glowing monitor. What I found in those records was infinitely worse than a simple crypto scam. My mother had not just mortgaged her house, she had practically signed her own death warrant. The disbursement account listed on my mother's mortgage document belonged to an entity called Apex Digital Holdings, LLC. It sounded official enough to fool a woman whose financial literacy peaked at balancing a checkbook. But to someone who spent her life dissecting corporate structures, it was a glaring red flag. I opened my specialized corporate registry software and ran a comprehensive background check on Apex Digital Holdings. The results populated almost instantly. The company was registered exactly 4 months ago, right around the time Kendrick proposed to Jasmine. It had no operational history, no listed employees, and its primary business address was a mailbox at a local shipping store in a rundown strip mall. There was absolutely no cryptocurrency exchange license attached to his name. There were no trading portfolios, no digital wallets registered under corporate protection, and no legitimate business tax ID numbers. Kendrick was not a visionary digital asset investor. He was a ghost. I dug deeper, pulling on the loose threads of his financial existence. Using my high-level access to credit reporting agencies and public civil judgments, I tracked the movement of the $100,000 from the moment it hit the Apex Digital Holdings account. If he had invested that money, there would be a digital footprint. If he had hidden it, that footprint would just be harder to find. Within 15 minutes, I completely bypassed his amateur attempts at money laundering and found the truth hidden behind a labyrinth of shell accounts. Kendrick had not invested my mother's money into the blockchain. The cash had been immediately dispersed in 3 massive wire transfers, just 48 hours after my mother signed the mortgage paperwork. The first 2 transfers totaling over $60,000 were sent directly to offshore holding accounts heavily associated with illegal sports betting and underground gambling syndicates. Kendrick was a degenerate gambler. He had used my grandmother's legacy to pay off aggressive bookies. The crypto genius persona was nothing more than a desperate shield to hide his catastrophic gambling addiction from Jasmine and my gullible mother. He had spun a web of financial jargon to dazzle 2 women who desperately wanted to believe they had secured a wealthy alpha male for the family. In reality, he was drowning in debt and using them as a life raft. But the sickening reality did not stop there. I returned to the county property records to check the current status of the mortgage itself. When you take out a loan of that magnitude, the first payment is typically due within 30 to 45 days. My mother had signed the origination documents over 2 months ago, right before the wedding preparations hit their peak. I pulled up the lien status, holding my breath. The screen refreshed, displaying a bold red notification banner across the top of the digital file. Notice of default. My stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. Kendrick had not made a single payment to the bank. He had taken the $100,000, paid off his dangerous debts, and completely abandoned the monthly obligations on the house. My grandmother's beautiful house, the home where I had learned to walk the property with the wraparound porch and the big oak tree in the front yard, was officially 60 days past due. The commercial bank holding the note had already initiated the pre-foreclosure process. They were preparing to seize the asset. In less than 30 days, a county sheriff would show up at Valerie's front door with a legal eviction notice, and the property would be auctioned off on the courthouse steps to the highest bidder. My mother had handed the deed to her own executioner. She was so blinded by her obsession with having a successful son-in-law that she refused to see the financial knife sliding deep into her back. My hands were shaking not from sorrow but from a profound, calculated rage. Valerie had marched into my office, threatened my career, and tried to sue me for a wedding gift, all while her own home was quietly slipping through her fingers. And Kendrick was letting it happen. He was letting the woman who saved his life lose everything she owned. I had to know where the rest of the money went. $60,000 went to the bookies. $15,000 went to the Ritz-Carlton bar tab to stop the hotel from calling the police. That left approximately $25,000 unaccounted for. I ran a skip trace on Kendrick's name and his fake LLC, pulling up his most recent residential credit inquiries and lease applications. A fresh hit registered on the system from just a week ago. Kendrick had signed a 12-month lease for a luxury penthouse apartment in Buckhead, one of the most expensive and exclusive neighborhoods in Atlanta. I recognized the building address immediately. It was a sleek, ultra-modern glass tower favored by professional athletes and actual wealthy executives. The rent for those premium penthouse units started at $8,000 a month. The $25,000 he had left over from my mother's mortgage was exactly enough to cover the required first month, last month, and hefty security deposit required to move in. He had used the last scraps of my mother's stolen home equity to fund his lavish lifestyle and keep up the wealthy entrepreneur facade for Jasmine. He was sleeping in a luxury high-rise, while Valerie was weeks away from being homeless. I sat back in my chair staring at the glowing monitors. The complete picture of Kendrick's fraud was laid out before me in undeniable black and white numbers. He was not just a liar. He was a financial predator who had systematically targeted my family. And the most ironic part of it all was that Jasmine and Valerie thought they had won. They thought they had secured the bag while actively participating in their own financial ruin. They had traded me the daughter who actually possessed wealth and stability for a charismatic degenerate who was bleeding them dry. I reached for a legal pad on my desk and began making a meticulous checklist. I needed to move fast. If the bank foreclosed on Valerie's house, it would be sold to a corporate flipper. I could not let my grandmother's legacy fall into the hands of strangers, even if my mother deserved the harsh reality check. Furthermore, I needed to figure out exactly how Kendrick managed to secure a lease in a prestigious Buckhead building. Those property management companies ran rigorous background checks. They required verified proof of income tax returns and pristine credit scores. Kendrick had none of those things. His credit was destroyed, his LLC was a shell, and his income was entirely non-existent. The only way he could have bypassed the building's strict financial requirements was by committing blatant document forgery. He had to have submitted fake bank statements or fraudulent tax returns to the leasing office. As a wealth manager, fraud was my area of expertise. I knew exactly how to track it, and more importantly, I knew exactly how to expose it. I picked up my office phone and dialed the direct line to my lead private investigator, a former forensic accountant, who now worked exclusively for my firm. I needed him to pull the actual lease application Kendrick had submitted to the Buckhead building. I wanted to see the forged documents with my own two eyes. Just as I was leaving the voicemail for my investigator, my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently on the polished mahogany desk. The caller ID flashed brightly. It was Jasmine. I stared at the screen. She had not called me since she screamed at me in the valet area of the Ritz-Carlton. Now, suddenly, she was calling my personal cell phone in the middle of a workday. I let it ring 3 times, enjoying the sheer power of making her wait. Then I calmly picked it up and swiped the green button to accept the call. Before I could even say a word, a frantic, high-pitched wailing burst through the speaker. Jasmine was crying so hard she could barely catch her breath. "Simone," she sobbed, her voice cracking with absolute hysteria. "Simone, you have to help me. Please, you have to come right now." I kept my voice completely flat, devoid of any sisterly warmth or concern. "Why are you calling me Jasmine? Did you and Kendrick run out of champagne in the Maldives? Oh wait, you never made it to the airport." "I do not care about the honeymoon," she screamed, completely ignoring my sarcasm. The panic in her voice was raw and genuine. It was the sound of her perfect, heavily curated reality violently crashing down around her. "Simone, the building management just locked us out of our penthouse. The security guards are standing in front of our door, and they will not let us inside to get our things." I leaned forward, my interest immediately piqued. I had just discovered the penthouse lease 10 minutes ago, and now they were already locked out. "What do you mean they locked you out?" I asked. Jasmine choked on a sob, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. Kendrick was at the gym, and I was unpacking my designer bags. The property manager knocked on the door with 2 armed security guards. They told me I had 10 minutes to grab my purse and step out into the hallway. They changed the electronic locks right in front of me. They said the lease was fraudulent. They said Kendrick submitted forged bank statements and a fake social security number to get approved for the penthouse. I listened to her cry, feeling absolutely nothing but cold satisfaction. Kendrick's house of cards was collapsing much faster than I had anticipated. "Where is your successful husband right now?" I asked smoothly. "He is down in the lobby yelling at the concierge," she wailed. The manager said if he does not leave the premises immediately, they are calling the police to have him arrested for criminal trespassing and wire fraud. Simone. I am sitting on my luggage in the lobby with everyone staring at me. Please come get me. You have to fix this. I smiled at the skyline outside my window. I am on my way, Jasmine. Do not move. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the passenger seat of my Porsche. The drive from my downtown office to Buckhead usually took about 20 minutes, but today the Atlanta traffic seemed to part specifically for me. The skyline shifted from the dense, towering corporate skyscrapers to the ultra-luxurious, glass-fronted residential buildings that defined the wealthy enclave of Buckhead. I pulled up to the grand entrance of the Luminary, a 50-story architectural masterpiece of steel and reflective glass. The valet rushed forward to open my door, recognizing my vehicle immediately. I handed him the keys with a polite nod and walked through the heavy revolving doors into the expansive temperature-controlled lobby. The contrast between the serene, opulent environment and the absolute human garbage fire unfolding in the center of the room was almost poetic. The lobby was a masterpiece of modern interior design, featuring imported Italian marble floors, massive crystal chandeliers, and a tranquil indoor waterfall that usually projected an aura of complete peace. Today, however, that peace was entirely shattered. Jasmine was sitting in the middle of the lobby floor, surrounded by a mountain of designer luggage. She looked like a deposed beauty queen. Her perfectly styled hair was frizzing, her expensive makeup was running down her cheeks in dark, streaky lines, and she was clutching a small Hermes handbag to her chest like a life preserver. She was sobbing loudly, drawing the discreet but undeniable stares of wealthy residents passing through. Standing a few feet away at the main concierge desk was Kendrick. He was waving his arms aggressively, his face flushed with anger, yelling at a stoic, impeccably dressed property manager and two large, unbothered security guards. "This is completely illegal," Kendrick shouted, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "You cannot just lock people out of their own home." "I signed a legally binding lease. I paid the deposits. This is exactly what they do to successful black men in this city. You see a young wealthy brother moving into a penthouse, and your racist system immediately tries to find a way to tear him down. You are profiling me. I am going to call my lawyers and sue this entire building for discrimination. I will own this tower by the time I am finished with you." The property manager, a seasoned professional named Marcus, did not even blink. "Sir, I have explained this to you 3 times. This has absolutely nothing to do with race and everything to do with federal wire fraud. The bank statements and tax returns you submitted to our leasing office were flagged by our corporate compliance software this morning. They are fraudulent documents. The Social Security number you provided belongs to a deceased individual in Ohio. Your lease is null and void. We have already packed your belongings. If you do not vacate the lobby in the next 5 minutes, I will have the Atlanta Police Department escort you out in handcuffs." Jasmine wailed louder at the word handcuffs. She looked up and finally saw me standing near the entrance. "Simone," she cried out, scrambling to her feet and running over to me. Her heels clicked frantically against the marble. "You have to do something. They are treating Kendrick like a criminal. He is an investor. Tell them who you are. Tell them you will vouch for us." I looked at my sister, taking in her swollen eyes and desperate pleading expression. I felt a brief, fleeting pang of pity, but it was quickly swallowed by the cold reality of what her husband had done to our mother. I stepped past Jasmine without offering her a hug or a word of comfort. I walked straight toward the concierge desk. Kendrick saw me approaching and immediately puffed out his chest, trying to maintain his alpha male facade. "Oh good," he sneered. "The cavalry is here. Listen to me, Simone. You need to call your banking contacts right now. These racist rent-a-cops are trying to say my financial documents are fake. You know I have capital tied up in offshore crypto accounts. Tell these idiots that my money is good so we can go back upstairs to our home." I stopped next to Kendrick and looked directly at Marcus. The property manager immediately stood up straighter, smoothing the lapels of his suit jacket. His stern, unyielding expression instantly transformed into one of deep professional respect. "Good afternoon, Miss Simone," Marcus said, offering a polite bow of his head. "I apologize for the disturbance in the lobby. We are handling the situation." You are doing an excellent job, Marcus, I replied smoothly. Have you securely changed the access codes for the penthouse elevator bank? Yes, ma'am, Marcus confirmed. The electronic locks on the unit have been swapped and his key fobs are completely deactivated. The premises are secure. Kendrick stared at Marcus, then looked at me, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. Wait a minute, he said, his voice dropping an octave. Why is he calling you ma'am? How do you know the property manager? Jasmine grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my silk blouse. Simone, what is going on? Why are you talking to him like you are his boss? Fix this right now. I gently but firmly removed Jasmine's hand from my arm. I turned to face her, making sure my voice was loud and clear enough for both of them to hear every single syllable. I am not going to fix this, Jasmine, I said calmly. Because Marcus is absolutely right. Kendrick submitted completely forged bank statements, fake tax returns, and a stolen social security number to get approved for the penthouse. Jasmine gasped, taking a step back as if I had physically struck her. No, she whispered, shaking her head aggressively. No, that is a lie. He showed me the statements. He has millions in his trading accounts. The system here just made a mistake. There is no mistake, Jasmine. I continued, my tone unyielding and clinical. And I know there is no mistake because I do not just know Marcus. I am the majority shareholder of the real estate investment trust that owns the Luminary. This is my building. My corporate compliance office is the one that flagged his fraudulent application this morning. Kendrick literally tried to scam his way into a penthouse owned by my company. The silence that fell over our small circle was absolute. The background noise of the lobby seemed to fade away entirely. Jasmine's jaw dropped. She looked up at the towering glass atrium, then back down at the marble floor, her mind desperately trying to process the magnitude of the revelation. Her sister, the woman she had looked down upon and mocked for being a lonely workaholic, owned the ultra-luxury building she had been bragging about on social media all week. Kendrick's face went completely ashen. The aggressive posturing alpha male routine vanished instantly. His mouth opened and closed silently like a fish pulled out of water. He had spent the last 24 hours walking around the penthouse like a king, completely unaware that he had walked directly into the lion's den. He had unwittingly handed his fabricated financial life directly to the one woman in Atlanta who could instantly verify and destroy it. You own the building, Jasmine whispered, her voice trembling with shock. I own 60% of the holding group. Yes, I clarified. And let me tell you how your husband paid the deposit for that beautiful penthouse you loved so much. He did not use cryptocurrency. He did not use investment returns. He used the $25,000 he had left over after he manipulated our mother into taking out a $100,000 mortgage on grandmother's house. Jasmine froze. What are you talking about? Mom's house is paid off. Not anymore, I said, driving the final nail into the coffin of her perfect reality. Kendrick convinced Valerie to mortgage the house to pay the Ritz-Carlton bar tab I left him with last weekend. He took the rest of the cash, paid off his underground sports betting debts, and used the very last pennies to rent this apartment to impress you. He has not made a single payment on Mom's new mortgage. The bank officially issued a notice of default yesterday. Grandmother's house is going into foreclosure, Jasmine. Valerie is going to be homeless in 30 days because your husband is a degenerate gambling addict and a world-class fraud. I waited for the realization to wash over her. I expected her to turn on him. I expected her to scream at Kendrick, to slap him across the face for putting our mother's home in jeopardy, to demand answers for the lies he had fed her since the day they met. But that is the tragic thing about the golden child. They are entirely incapable of processing reality when it shatters their curated image. Jasmine looked at Kendrick, who was sweating profusely and refusing to make eye contact with her. She looked at the mountain of luggage. And then, completely bypassing all logic and reason, she turned her absolute fury directly onto me. You are lying! Jasmine screamed, her face contorting with a sudden vicious rage. You are making all of this up! Jasmine, the documents are right here, I said, gesturing to the folder on Marcus's desk. I do not care about the documents, she yelled, stomping her foot on the marble floor like a spoiled toddler. You have always been jealous of me. From the time we were little girls, you hated that Mom loved me more. You hated that I was popular. You hated that I found a good man while you sit alone in your empty house with your spreadsheets. You could not stand the fact that Kendrick is a successful entrepreneur who treats me like a queen. So you used your corporate connections to sabotage his business accounts. You probably hacked his files to make them look fake just so you could publicly humiliate us again. I stared at her, genuinely astounded by the sheer Olympic-level mental gymnastics she was performing to protect her fragile ego. She would rather believe I orchestrated a massive corporate conspiracy to frame her husband than admit she married a broke con artist. Jasmine, I said softly, almost pitying her profound delusion. He stole Mom's house. He is a criminal. Open your eyes. Shut up! She shrieked, covering her ears with her hands. Do not talk about my husband. You are just a bitter, evil bitch. I hate you. I never want to see your face again. Kendrick, sensing that his wife was successfully choosing the delusion over the truth, instantly regained his false bravado. The panic in his eyes vanished, replaced by a dark, malicious sneer. He reached out and grabbed Jasmine tightly by the arm, pulling her against his chest in a protective stance. He pointed a finger inches from my face. You heard my wife, Kendrick hissed, his voice dropping into a menacing whisper. We are done with you. You think you are so incredibly smart, Simone. You think because you sit in an office and sign papers that you control everyone around you. You think you can just destroy my reputation and walk away clean. I do not have to destroy your reputation, Kendrick, I replied, entirely unbothered by his aggressive posturing. You never had one to begin with. You are a broke, desperate man sleeping on the street tonight. Kendrick let out a dark, arrogant laugh. He leaned in closer, his breath hot and foul. Is that right? You think this little stunt today means you won? You think locking us out of an apartment changes anything? You clearly do not understand how this family works, Simone. Jasmine knows the truth. Valerie knows the truth. And by this weekend, the entire community will know exactly what kind of monster you really are. He grabbed the handles of two heavy Louis Vuitton suitcases, pulling Jasmine toward the sliding glass exit doors. He stopped and looked back at me over his shoulder, a wicked, confident smile spreading across his face. Just wait until Sunday service, Simone, he sneered. His eyes filled with absolute malice. When the church elders and your precious mother are finished with you, you will not have a family, you will not have a reputation, and you will be completely finished in this city. Mark my words, you are finished. He shoved his way through the revolving glass doors, dragging his sobbing wife and his counterfeit designer luggage out into the sweltering Atlanta heat. I stood perfectly still on the cool Italian marble, watching them frantically try to flag down a rideshare vehicle on the busy street corner. Marcus, the property manager, stepped up beside me, clearing his throat quietly. Miss Simone, he asked respectfully, shall I instruct the security team to permanently ban them from the premises? Yes, Marcus, I replied, my eyes fixed on Kendrick as he violently threw a suitcase into the trunk of a battered sedan. Ban them permanently. And make sure those fraudulent lease documents are securely forwarded to our corporate legal department immediately. I will need the hard copies by tomorrow morning. Understood, ma'am, Marcus said, before retreating to his desk. I turned and walked slowly back toward the valet stand, my mind already calculating my next series of defensive maneuvers. Kendrick was cornered, broke, and desperate, which made him exceptionally dangerous. He was planning to weaponize the one institution my mother valued above all else, the church. He was going to use the Sunday service to launch a full-scale character assassination against me in front of the entire congregation. He thought the heavy weight of religious guilt and communal shame would finally break my spirit. He thought he could turn the entire city against me. I slipped into the driver's seat of my Porsche and gripped the leather steering wheel. I was not afraid of his petty threats. I was completely exhilarated. Let him bring his lies to the pulpit. Let him try to turn my own mother against me in the sanctuary. He had absolutely no idea what kind of holy fire I was preparing to rain down upon him. The penthouse eviction was merely a polite warning. Sunday service was going to be an absolute slaughter. I started the engine, the powerful roar vibrating through the quiet luxury of the luminary's pristine driveway. I merged back onto the crowded Atlanta streets, a cold, predatory smile slowly forming on my face. Kendrick wanted a public war. He was going to get one. I reached for my phone and dialed my lawyer. By Sunday morning, the atmosphere in Atlanta had grown thick with the oppressive summer humidity. But the chill I felt walking up the stone steps of Greater Hope Baptist Church was entirely man-made. I arrived 10 minutes before the service started wearing a tailored charcoal suit that projected absolute authority. For over a decade, this church had been my spiritual anchor and a cornerstone of my professional network. I was a respected member, a generous tither, and the acting chair of the church finance committee. But the moment I stepped through the heavy oak doors into the grand foyer, I knew the battle lines had already been drawn. The vibrant chatter that usually echoed through the vestibule died down to a hushed, venomous whisper as I walked past the greeters. Women in elaborate Sunday hats actively turned their backs to me. Men who usually shook my hand and asked for investment advice suddenly found the intricate patterns on the carpet fascinating. I saw a group of Jasmine's sorority sisters standing near the sanctuary doors. They glared at me with open disgust, whispering behind their manicured hands. Kendrick and Valerie had not wasted a single second. After I left them stranded on the curb outside the luminary, they had immediately gone to work weaponizing the congregation. I did not need to guess what lies they were spreading. The aggressive, judgmental stares told me everything. In our community, there is no greater sin than abandoning your family when you have the means to help them. Valerie had undoubtedly painted herself as the long-suffering matriarch weeping on the phone to the church elders. Kendrick had played the role of the noble, struggling entrepreneur unfairly targeted by a bitter sister-in-law. But they had added a new devastating layer to their smear campaign. I caught snippets of the rumor as I made my way down the center aisle. She stole her father's money, left her own mother with nothing, stole the inheritance. They had spun a fabricated narrative that my wealth management firm was not built on my own hard work and intellect, but funded by money I had secretly siphoned from my late father's estate, leaving Valerie destitute and forcing her to mortgage her home to survive. It was a brilliant, malicious lie designed to completely destroy my credibility and character. I walked to my usual pew near the front. Normally, the row was packed with friendly faces. Today, the space around me remained entirely empty. Valerie, Jasmine, and Kendrick were seated 3 rows ahead on the opposite side of the sanctuary. Kendrick had his arm wrapped protectively around Jasmine, portraying the perfect unified couple. Valerie sat beside them, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the tragic victim to absolute perfection. When Kendrick glanced over his shoulder and saw me sitting alone, a smug, victorious smirk flashed across his face. He truly believed he had won the social war. I sat quietly through the 2-hour service. I did not sing. I did not bow my head. I simply watched the masterful performance of a family completely consumed by their own toxicity. When the final benediction was given, I stood up to leave. Before I could even reach the aisle, an usher touched my shoulder and quietly informed me that Pastor Davis requested my presence in his private office immediately. I walked down the quiet hallway behind the choir loft and stepped into the pastor's study. Pastor Davis was sitting behind his heavy mahogany desk, his face lined with deep concern. He gestured for me to sit down, but I chose to remain standing. "Simone," he began, his voice heavy with a rehearsed pastoral sadness. "I am going to be direct with you. Your mother came to see me late last night. She was absolutely heartbroken. She shared some deeply troubling information regarding the financial disputes within your family, specifically concerning the funding of your business and the current state of her home mortgage." I looked at him calmly. "And you believed her, Pastor?" "I believe that where there is smoke, there is usually fire," he replied, folding his hands on his desk. "Simone, you know this church relies on absolute transparency and moral integrity, especially from those in leadership positions. The allegations your family has brought forward are severe. They are saying you maliciously sabotaged Kendrick's housing situation and that you withheld family funds. Given the current tension and the rumors spreading rapidly among the congregation, the elder board and I feel it is best if you step down from your position as the chair of the finance committee. Just temporarily, until these personal family matters are fully resolved." The betrayal was sharp, but not unexpected. A man who had trusted my financial counsel for 10 years was tossing me aside based on the tears of a manipulator and the lies of a con artist. They were isolating me, cutting off my influence, and stripping away my communal respect. I looked Pastor Davis straight in the eye. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I knew from years of corporate warfare that arguing with fools who have already made up their minds is a complete waste of breath. Trying to present facts to a man blinded by emotion would only make me look desperate. I understand completely, Pastor, I said, my voice smooth and perfectly detached. If the church values hearsay over evidence, then I am more than happy to step down. I will have my assistant send over all the financial transition documents by tomorrow morning. Have a wonderful Sunday. I turned and walked out of his office before he could offer another word of fake sympathy. I walked out of the church, ignored the glaring eyes in the parking lot, and got into my car. I did not cry. I did not feel defeated. I felt a cold, hyper-focused clarity. Every emotion, every lingering trace of familial obligation evaporated completely, leaving behind only the sharp instincts of a woman who knew exactly how to dismantle her enemies. Kendrick had played his hand. He had used social warfare to try and break me. Now it was time for me to use actual tangible power to break him. I spent the next 48 hours in absolute silence. I did not answer any calls from church members. I completely ignored the barrage of passive-aggressive text messages from my aunts and cousins who had heard the rumors. Instead, I transformed my downtown office into a strategic war room. I sat at my conference table with my lead corporate attorney and my private investigator, surrounded by stacks of financial documents, background checks, and legal statutes. We meticulously built an airtight case over the next 2 days, leaving no room for error or misinterpretation. My investigator secured the hard copies of the forged lease documents from the luminary's property management office. We acquired the official wire transfer receipts, showing exactly where the $100,000 from my mother's mortgage had gone. We mapped out Kendrick's illegal sports betting connections. We pulled the original probate records from my father's estate, proving definitively that he had died deeply in debt and left absolutely no money for me to steal. Every single lie Valerie and Kendrick had told the church was systematically dismantled by hard, undeniable, legally binding paperwork. But having the evidence was only half the battle. I needed the perfect venue to execute the strike. I needed to trap them in a scenario where they could not run, could not lie, and could not manipulate the audience. I needed them to feel completely safe and victorious right before I pulled the ground out from under them. By Wednesday morning, the plan was fully in place. I was sitting at my desk sipping a cup of black coffee and reviewing a client portfolio when my secure banking portal emitted a sharp, high-priority chime. I set my coffee mug down and clicked on the notification icon. It was a direct alert from my elite commercial banking contact, a senior asset manager who owed me several significant professional favors. I had asked him to place a quiet internal watch on the specific mortgage note attached to my grandmother's house. The information flashing on my screen made my pulse accelerate with dark anticipation. The alert confirmed my worst calculations. Valerie had completely ignored the default notices. Kendrick had obviously convinced her that he was handling it, feeding her more lies about delayed crypto transfers and banking errors. Because no action had been taken to cure the massive default, the commercial bank was officially moving the property into active foreclosure status. The formal legal proceedings were scheduled to initiate the very next morning at exactly 9 o'clock. Once that button was pressed, my mother's house would become the legal property of the bank, slated for public auction. My mother was 24 hours away from losing everything she had ever known. Kendrick had successfully driven her straight off a financial cliff, and she was still blindly holding his hand, smiling as they fell. I picked up my secure phone line and dialed my commercial banking contact directly. He answered on the second ring. "Simone," he said briskly, "you saw the alert. They are initiating the foreclosure on the property tomorrow morning. The account is totally dead." "I saw it," I replied, pulling up my corporate treasury dashboard on my second monitor. "I need you to pull the note from the foreclosure queue immediately. Simone, you know I cannot just pause a legal foreclosure without a massive capital injection. The bank wants this toxic debt off their books. They are going to sell the note to a corporate liquidator by the end of the week." "They do not have to sell it to a liquidator," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "I am buying the debt, right now, today." There was a brief pause on the line as the banker processed my request. Buying distressed mortgage debt was a highly aggressive real estate strategy. It meant I was not paying off my mother's loan to save her. I was legally purchasing the promissory note directly from the bank. I was stepping into the shoes of the lender. I would own the debt, which meant I would hold the absolute legal right to foreclose on the property myself. "You want to buy the note outright," he clarified, a hint of professional respect in his tone. "You want to become the primary lien holder on the property." "Exactly," I confirmed. "Calculate the total outstanding principal, the accumulated late fees, and the early termination penalties. Give me the absolute final buyout number." I heard him typing rapidly on his keyboard. "The total cost to acquire the note free and clear is $104,250. I navigated to the wire transfer portal on my screen. I authorized the release of the funds from my corporate capital reserves, typing in the specific routing sequence. "The wire transfer is processing on my end," I told him, pressing the final execution button. "Send the legal transfer of ownership documents to my attorney by noon." "Done," he replied. "The debt is yours, Simone. You are officially the bank." I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. A notification popped up on my cell phone. It was a text message from Valerie, sent to a massive family group chat that included everyone from my aunts to the church elders. "Family barbecue this Saturday at my house," the text read. "Kendrick has some wonderful news about his business to share with everyone. Time for healing and forgiveness. Simone, you are invited if you are ready to apologize." I stared at the glowing screen, a cold smile touching my lips. My mother was hosting a victory party in a house she no longer owned to celebrate a business that did not exist, protected by a son-in-law who belonged in a federal prison. I typed a very brief response. "I will be there." I pressed send on the text message and immediately locked my phone, tossing it onto the passenger seat. The digital wire transfer had initiated the transaction, but in the ruthless world of commercial real estate and high-yield debt acquisition, a digital handshake is never enough. To make my ownership of my mother's mortgage legally bulletproof, I needed physical signatures, notarized documents, and an official assignment of the deed recorded promptly with the county clerk. I grabbed my tailored blazer, walked out of my high-rise office, and drove straight to the commercial banking headquarters, situated deep in the heart of Midtown Atlanta, to finalize the execution of my trap. David, the senior asset manager who handled distressed portfolios for the institution, was waiting for me in a pristine, climate-controlled glass conference room. He was a sharp, practical man who respected capital above all else. He slid a thick, heavily tabbed stack of legal documents across the polished mahogany table. The paperwork detailed the absolute transfer of the promissory note and the deed to secure the debt. I read through the clauses meticulously. By purchasing this specific note directly, I was not forgiving Kendrick's catastrophic financial failure. I was certainly not bailing my mother out of her staggeringly poor decisions. I was officially stepping into the shoes of the commercial lender. I was the bank. Because Valerie had already failed to make her required monthly payments for over 60 days, the loan was in active, incurable default. By signing these documents, I immediately held the supreme legal authority to foreclose on the property, evict the occupants, and liquidate the asset without requiring any further permission from anyone. I picked up the heavy silver pen provided by the bank and signed my name on the dotted line. The ink dried quickly, sealing my absolute control over the one tangible thing my mother valued more than her own children. Her precious house, the very ground she stood on to judge me, was now legally at my absolute mercy. The next morning, as I was sitting in my office reviewing the final certified copies of the deed assignment, my cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. She had already sent the group text invitation regarding the barbecue, but Valerie never left things to chance when she was running a targeted manipulation campaign. She needed to hear my voice to gauge my emotional state and ensure her trap was perfectly set. I let the phone ring 3 times, taking a deep breath to center my focus before accepting the call. I kept my breathing slow and my tone perfectly neutral. "Simone, my sweet girl," Valerie said. Her voice dripped with a thick, sugary warmth that I had not heard since I was a little girl. It was the exact calculated tone she used whenever she wanted me to buy her a new luxury vehicle or fund an expensive family vacation. I saw your brief text message in the family group chat, but I just wanted to call and personally tell you how incredibly happy I am that you are coming to the barbecue tomorrow afternoon. We have missed you so much this week. It has been far too quiet without you around. I listened to her perform, feeling a deep, profound sense of disgust wash over me. Just a few days ago, she had stormed into my corporate office with a cheap, flashy lawyer screaming that I was an evil daughter and threatening to sue me for $80,000. She had stood idly by while Kendrick publicly humiliated me at the Ritz-Carlton reception. She had actively participated in a vicious, highly coordinated smear campaign at our church, falsely accusing me of stealing my late father's non-existent inheritance. And now, simply because she thought she had the upper hand, she was effortlessly slipping back into the role of the loving, forgiving matriarch. I am looking forward to attending Valerie, I replied, keeping my answers deliberately short, to force her to fill the empty silence with more lies. Valerie sighed dramatically into the receiver, playing the peacemaker. I know things got a little heated at the wedding, and I know feelings were hurt on both sides. But Kendrick is a good man, Simone. He has a wonderful heart. He feels absolutely terrible about the misunderstanding at the apartment building yesterday. He wants to apologize to you in person in front of the whole family and just make things right. He has some amazing news about his new business ventures, and he wants to share his ongoing success with you. We just want our family to be whole again. You are my daughter, and I love you. Let us just put all this ugly financial business behind us and move forward in grace. I ended the call shortly after my mind instantly dissecting the glaring fatal flaws in her performance. Kendrick did not want to apologize to me. Narcissists and con artists do not feel genuine remorse. They only feel panic when their survival is actively threatened. Yesterday, I had locked him out of his fake luxury penthouse and exposed his forged financial documents to my corporate compliance team. He knew that the property management company had the legal right to press federal wire fraud charges against him at any moment. He was completely cornered, entirely broke, and desperate to keep himself out of a federal prison. This barbecue was not a celebration of family unity or spiritual healing. It was a carefully orchestrated high-pressure ambush. Kendrick was planning to use the heavy, suffocating pressure of our extended family and the church elders to force me into submission. I knew exactly how these events operated in our community. He would stand up in front of the smoking grill, play the humble, misunderstood businessman, and offer a fake, tearful apology to the crowd. Then, while the aunties and the pastor were nodding in deep approval, he would pull out a legal document. It would undoubtedly be a non-disclosure agreement or a settlement waiver, demanding that I formally drop the fraud investigation at the luminary and release his seized luggage. If I refused to sign it right there on the patio, I would be instantly painted as the bitter, unforgiving villain who was trying to destroy a successful black man's future out of pure spite. They were going to use my own community as a weapon to trap me. What Kendrick and Valerie completely failed to realize was that I was fully immune to their social engineering. You cannot weaponize guilt against someone who no longer cares about your opinion. I did not just plan to attend their little barbecue and sit quietly. I planned to turn it into an absolute slaughter. I picked up my office phone and dialed the direct line to a premium private security firm I frequently contracted for high-profile corporate asset seizures. I asked for their top operative, a highly trained professional who specialized in close-quarters threat de-escalation. I explicitly instructed him to dress in casual weekend attire, a simple polo shirt and jeans, so he would blend in perfectly with the family cookout environment. His sole job was to stand quietly by my side and ensure Kendrick did not try to get physically violent when the truth finally cornered him. Next, I called my retained legal counsel and requested the immediate dispatch of an aggressive licensed process server. I needed someone who was completely unfazed by loud arguments, crying, and extreme emotional outbursts. The process server was also instructed to dress casually, posing as a casual +1 or a colleague from my office. They were to carry a specialized leather portfolio containing two very specific legal documents. The first was a formal 24-hour eviction notice for my mother's property, heavily citing the defaulted mortgage I now legally owned. The second was a finalized legally binding notification from my real estate holding company regarding the fraudulent penthouse lease, officially turning the criminal matter over to the authorities. With my tactical team secured, I turned my absolute attention to the ammunition. I walked over to the heavy-duty corporate printer in the corner of my office and hit print on a massive encrypted file. The machine hummed to life, spitting out page after page of undeniable catastrophic truth. I gathered the certified bank statements, showing Kendrick transferring my mother's home equity directly to illegal sports bookies. I printed the high-definition still frames from the private investigator's camera, showing exactly where Kendrick had been spending his time and his stolen money. I organized the official deed of assignment proudly stamped with the county clerk's red seal, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was the sole owner of the ground Valerie would be standing on. I meticulously arranged the thick stack of papers into a sleek black leather binder. It was heavy-packed with enough explosive evidence to completely obliterate Kendrick's fake empire and shatter my mother's delusions permanently. I placed the binder carefully into my designer tote bag and checked my watch. Tomorrow afternoon, the grill would be hot, the aunties would be gossiping, and Kendrick would confidently try to spring his trap. He thought he was inviting a helpless victim to the slaughter. He had absolutely no idea he had just invited the executioner. Saturday afternoon arrived with oppressive Georgia humidity, making the air feel heavy and thick. I pulled my Porsche onto the familiar suburban street where my grandmother's house stood. Cars lined the street, signaling a massive gathering. I parked and waited for a black sedan to pull up behind me. Two men stepped out. The first was Marcus, a private security operative wearing a polo shirt. The second was David, a licensed process server dressed in khaki slacks. To outsiders, they looked like colleagues joining a cookout. To me, they were the cavalry. I grabbed my black leather tote bag from the passenger seat, gave them a nod, and walked toward the backyard gate. Hickory smoke drifted over the wooden fence. The moment I unlatched the gate and stepped onto the back patio, the loud chatter of over 40 people dropped abruptly. The backyard was packed. My mother had invited half the congregation from Greater Hope Baptist Church. My judgmental aunties sat in lawn chairs under a canvas tent, fanning themselves and giving me severe glares. Jasmine stood near the patio furniture surrounded by her sorority sisters. Wearing a designer sundress, she laughed loudly, projecting the image of a carefree newlywed. Kendrick was manning the large stainless steel grill at the center of the yard, wearing an apron over a crisp linen shirt. Valerie saw me and broke away from a church elder. She hurried over wearing a bright floral dress and an artificial smile. "Simone, you made it," she announced loudly, ensuring the patio could hear her. She reached out to hug me, but I took a step back, forcing her to drop her arms. "I am glad you decided to join us today. And who are your handsome friends?" "These are my associates, Marcus and David," I replied smoothly, gesturing to the men behind me. They were reviewing real estate contracts with me, so I invited them to grab a plate. "I hope you do not mind." Valerie's smile faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. "The more the merrier," she lied effortlessly. "Get yourselves something to drink. We are about to make a special family announcement." I walked over to the beverage cooler, feeling the heavy weight of hostile eyes tracking my movement. The tension was suffocating. People were whispering behind their paper plates. Jasmine's sorority sisters rolled their eyes as I walked past them. The entire yard had been heavily primed to view me as the bitter, jealous antagonist who had come to beg for forgiveness. I grabbed a bottle of sparkling water and waited for the show to begin. I did not have to wait long. Kendrick picked up metal grilling tongs and tapped them loudly against the barbecue smoker. The sharp, clinking sound silenced the remaining chatter. The aunties stopped fanning themselves. The church members turned their attention to the center of the patio. Jasmine walked over and wrapped her arm around Kendrick's waist, resting her head on his shoulder, in a picture-perfect display of submissive loyalty. "Family and friends," Kendrick began, his voice projecting loudly across the lawn. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. As many of you know, this past week has been incredibly challenging for Jasmine and me. We have faced unexpected hurdles, spiritual attacks, and some deeply unfortunate misunderstandings within our own family circle. He paused dramatically, looking directly at me with an expression of fake sorrow. He was playing the righteous, persecuted man to absolute perfection. But I am a man of faith. He continued, placing his free hand over his heart. And my faith teaches me that a strong Black family is built on forgiveness, grace, and unity. We cannot let material things or petty jealousy tear apart the legacy we are trying to build. I love my wife. I love my mother-in-law, Valerie, who has been an absolute rock for us. And I even love my sister-in-law, Simone, despite the pain she has caused us. A collective murmur of approval rippled through the audience of church members. Aunt Shirley, my mother's oldest sister, nodded vigorously and shouted an amen from her lawn chair. Kendrick soaked up the communal validation like a sponge. I believe in moving forward, Kendrick announced, his tone shifting from humble to authoritative. I believe in putting the past behind us. Simone and I had a difficult situation regarding my business investments and a property dispute in Buckhead. But today, right here in front of God and our family, we are going to heal that divide. We are going to protect the culture of this family. Kendrick reached into the front pocket of his linen shirt and pulled out a folded stack of crisp legal papers. He handed the tongs to Jasmine, stepped away from the grill, and walked directly toward me. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, allowing him a clear path. He stopped 2 feet in front of me, holding the documents out like an olive branch covered in poison. Simone, Kendrick said, speaking loud enough for the entire yard to hear every word. I have had my attorneys draft a standard non-disclosure and settlement agreement. It simply states that you will immediately drop all false allegations regarding my business accounts. You will release the hold on my corporate assets at the Luminary, and you will sign over a 10% equity stake in your wealth management firm as compensation for the severe reputational damage you inflicted on me this week. If you sign this today, right now, we will drop the promissory estoppel lawsuit against you. We will welcome you back into this family with open arms. We will forgive your toxic jealousy. All you have to do is sign. The sheer audacity of his demand was breathtaking. He was broke, facing imminent federal wire fraud charges, and secretly living out of a suitcase. Yet he was standing in a backyard he did not own, trying to extort equity from a multi-million-dollar firm just to save his fragile ego. He had orchestrated this entire public spectacle because he thought I would rather surrender my wealth than face the collective shame of my community. Before I could even respond, Valerie stepped forward and placed her hand firmly on my shoulder. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. Simone, please do the right thing, my mother urged, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. Kendrick is offering you a beautiful way out of this darkness. He is willing to forgive you. Do it for the family. Do it so we can have peace in this house. The aunties immediately chimed in, forming a tight, suffocating circle around me. You need to humble yourself, Simone, Aunt Shirley scolded, pointing a finger at my face. You cannot take your money to the grave. This man is trying to build a future for your sister. You need to support him instead of tearing him down. Sign the paper, Simone, another church member called out from the back. Stop being so stubborn. Protect the family. Jasmine added, her voice dripping with venom as she glared at me. Stop trying to ruin my life and just sign it. The pressure was heavy, coordinated, and incredibly intense. This was the toxic core of my family dynamic on full, unashamed display. They were actively demanding that the successful independent woman sacrifice her hard-earned stability to protect the fragile pride of a lying, manipulative man. They wanted me to bow down. They wanted me to be small so Kendrick could look big. I looked at the legal document in Kendrick's hand. I looked at my mother, whose eyes were silently begging me to comply and save her from the embarrassment of a public dispute. I looked at the aunties, who were nodding in self-righteous agreement. Finally, I looked back at Kendrick. He was smiling. It was a cruel, victorious smile. He held out a sleek black ink pen toward me, offering me the tool of my own surrender. I reached out and took the pen from his hand. The crowd let out a collective sigh of relief. Valerie squeezed my shoulder affectionately. Jasmine smiled triumphantly at her sorority sisters. Kendrick relaxed his posture, assuming the battle was completely over. I looked down at the documents in my hands. I read the bold heading, demanding the transfer of my corporate equity. I held the papers for 10 agonizingly long seconds, letting the silence stretch across the humid backyard. I looked up at Kendrick, maintaining absolute eye contact. And then I laughed. It was not a soft chuckle. It was a loud, sharp, unbothered laugh that echoed across the patio, cutting through the humidity. The smiles instantly vanished. Valerie snatched her hand off my shoulder. Kendrick's smirk dissolved into deep panic. With one swift, forceful motion, I ripped the papers entirely in half. The yard went completely terrifyingly silent. I smiled coldly. You really thought I would sign this? I let the torn pieces of Kendrick's ridiculous settlement agreement flutter to the freshly cut grass. The sheer, unadulterated shock on the faces surrounding me was completely intoxicating. I did not give them a single second to recover their composure or formulate a new attack. I reached into my designer leather tote bag and pulled out the heavy black binder I had meticulously prepared. It landed on the outdoor dining table with a loud, authoritative thud right next to a silver platter of grilled ribs. Valerie stared at the thick binder, her false maternal warmth completely evaporating in an instant, replaced by a sudden creeping dread that visibly tightened her facial features. "What is that, Simone?" she demanded, her voice entirely losing its sugary, manipulative coating. "What are you doing right now?" "I am saving this family, Mother," I replied, my tone dripping with icy clinical precision. "Since we are all standing here under the grand banner of absolute honesty, spiritual healing, and total transparency, I think it is only fair that the entire congregation understands exactly what kind of successful businessman you invited to man your grill today." I opened the heavy binder. The first document was right on top, printed on thick official bank letterhead with a glaring red stamp across the top margin. I picked it up and held it out between two fingers. "Mom, did you know your house was foreclosed on yesterday?" I asked loudly, ensuring my voice carried perfectly over the quiet patio and reached the ears of every single person present. The collective gasp from the aunties and church members was instantaneous and dramatic. Valerie physically recoiled as if I had reached across the table and slapped her across the face. Her eyes darted wildly around the yard, looking at her judgmental friends, her older sister, and finally resting on Kendrick's face. "That is a complete lie!" Valerie screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unbridled panic. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at my chest. "How dare you come into my home and spread malicious lies in front of my church family? My house is perfectly fine. Kendrick has been handling the mortgage payments through his corporate accounts. We have an agreement." "Has he?" I asked, stepping away from the table and moving directly into the crowd of seated women. I grabbed the thick stack of certified foreclosure notices from the binder and began passing them directly to the most vocal, judgmental women sitting in the lawn chairs. "Here you go, Aunt Shirley. Take a close look at the numbers. Pass that down to the church elders sitting next to you. Let everyone see the brilliant financial strategy Kendrick has been executing on your behalf." Aunt Shirley snatched the crisp paper from my hand, aggressively adjusting her reading glasses on the bridge of her nose. The other women immediately crowded around her, reading over her shoulder with hungry, scandalized eyes. The absolute silence in the yard was suddenly broken by a rising chorus of shocked murmurs and frantic whispers. "Oh, my lord!" Aunt Shirley gasped loudly, pressing a hand flat against her chest. "Valerie, it says right here that the loan is over 60 days past due. The commercial bank initiated active foreclosure proceedings yesterday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. It says the total default amount is $100,000. The crowd erupted into total chaos. $100,000. What did he do with all that money? Valerie, did you take out a massive loan for this young boy? The whispering instantly turned into outright aggressive interrogations. The respectable, flawless image Valerie had carefully maintained for decades within the community was instantly shredded into pieces right in front of her most important audience. Valerie turned to Kendrick, her face completely pale, the horrifying realization finally breaking through her stubborn denial. "Kendrick," she pleaded, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "Kendrick, tell them she fabricated those papers. Tell them the bank made a terrible mistake. You told me the funds were transferring from your offshore accounts. You promised me my home was safe." Kendrick was sweating profusely. The confident, righteous alpha male persona he had projected just moments ago had completely vanished, replaced by a desperate, cornered rat caught in a trap of his own making. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, his eyes darting frantically toward the backyard gate, as if calculating whether he could simply outrun my private security. But Marcus, sensing the shift in energy, shifted his stance subtly but firmly, blocking the only exit path. Kendrick realized he could not run, so he resorted to the only defense mechanism he had ever known. He lied louder. "Listen to me, everyone," Kendrick shouted, waving his hands frantically in the air to quiet the panicked, buzzing crowd. "This is exactly the kind of vicious corporate sabotage I was talking about. This is nothing but a standard banking delay. When you are moving large volumes of digital capital across international borders, the traditional banking system often flags the transfers. It is a temporary hold for security purposes. The bank sends out these automated default notices all the time. It means absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of my business." He walked over to Valerie and placed his hands firmly on her shoulders, forcing her to look directly at him. "Valerie, listen to me right now. You know I am a dedicated provider. You know I would never put your home at risk. We are perfectly fine. By state real estate law, even if a foreclosure process officially starts, the homeowner has a 30-day statutory redemption period. We have an entire month to clear the balance. My main investment portfolio liquidates on Tuesday morning. I will personally go to the bank and pay the entire $100,000 in cash, plus interest, and this whole administrative nightmare will completely disappear. Simone is just using a minor clerical error to make me look bad in front of the family." Valerie desperately wanted to believe his lies. She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes, clinging to his empty promises with everything she had because the alternative reality was far too horrifying to accept. "He is going to fix it," she announced to the crowd, her voice shaking violently. "It is just a temporary bank error. He has the money coming on Tuesday." I stood back and watched him spin his ridiculous web of financial jargon. I let him calm my mother down. I let the aunties murmur in slight, hesitant relief. I let Kendrick believe for one fleeting, beautiful second that his silver tongue had successfully saved him from the gallows once again. Then I stepped right into his direct line of sight and delivered the absolute fatal blow. "You would have 30 days, Kendrick," I said, my voice cutting through the thick, humid air like a sharpened blade. "You would absolutely have a statutory redemption period to save this property if the bank still actually owned the loan. But they do not." Kendrick froze completely. His hands slowly dropped from Valerie's shaking shoulders. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice dropping into a raspy, terrified whisper. I smiled coldly, reaching back into my leather binder one final time. Commercial banks absolutely hate holding toxic defaulted debt on their books. When a massive loan goes unpaid for 60 days without a single phone call or payment from the borrower, they classify it as a dead asset. They want it off their balance sheets immediately to protect their shareholders. So yesterday afternoon, right before they pushed the final foreclosure button to seize the property, they listed the defaulted note on the private institutional market. I pulled out the heavy notarized deed of assignment. The document featured a bright gold county seal, the official bank insignia, and my unmistakable bold signature on the bottom line. I held it up high so the entire patio could see it clearly in the afternoon sun. "They sold the debt," I announced loudly, letting the sheer, undeniable weight of my words crush the very last remaining drop of hope out of his chest. "And I bought it this morning. I paid the commercial bank $104,250 in liquid cash. I assumed the primary position on the deed. I do not care about your fake offshore accounts, Kendrick. I do not care about a 30-day redemption period, because you do not owe the commercial bank anymore. You owe me. I am the primary lien holder. I am the bank. This is my house now. The absolute earth-shattering devastation that swept across the yard was truly magnificent to witness. Aunt Shirley dropped the paper she was holding as if it had caught fire. Pastor Davis, who had been standing silently near the back porch stairs, lowered his head in utter speechless shock. My mother collapsed backward into a plastic patio chair, her legs completely giving out beneath her weight. She buried her face in her hands, releasing a loud, agonizing wail of pure, unadulterated despair. The proud woman who had publicly kicked me out of her VIP section at the wedding reception was now merely a vulnerable tenant residing in the property I completely owned. But I was not quite finished. I turned toward David, the licensed process server, who had been standing quietly by the wooden fence this entire time, blending in seamlessly until this exact moment. "David," I called out clearly, "please proceed with the delivery." David nodded with absolute professional detachment. He stepped out of the shadows, walked straight up to Kendrick, and handed him a thick, rigid manila envelope. Kendrick stared at it, too physically stunned to raise his hands, so David simply tapped the heavy envelope against Kendrick's chest, letting it fall softly to the grass right at his feet. Kendrick David said, his voice loud, formal, and authoritative. "You have been officially served. That envelope contains a formal 24-hour eviction notice. As the sole legal owner of this property, Miss Simone requires you to vacate the premises entirely by tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. If you are found anywhere on this property after the designated deadline, you will be immediately arrested by local law enforcement for criminal trespassing." Kendrick stared down at the brown envelope lying on the grass. His chest was heaving uncontrollably. The entire carefully constructed facade of the wealthy, successful, dominant entrepreneur had been violently ripped away, leaving behind absolutely nothing but a broke, humiliated con artist standing entirely exposed in front of the very people he had tried so desperately to impress. He had absolutely nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide his failures, and no one left in the yard to manipulate. Suddenly, Jasmine pushed her way aggressively through the crowd of stunned sorority sisters. She ran over to Kendrick and grabbed his arm fiercely, placing herself firmly and protectively between him and me. Her face was bright red and heavily streaked with running mascara. Her expensive designer sundress looking completely absurd amidst the utter catastrophic destruction of her perfect reality. "Stop it!" Jasmine screamed at me at the top of her lungs, her shrill voice echoing wildly across the neighboring yards. "Stop doing this to us right now. You are a complete monster. He is my husband. He is a provider for our family. He used that money to fund his startup business. He is trying to build a massive empire for our future. He made a small administrative mistake with the banking payments, but he truly loves me. You are just jealous because no man has ever loved you enough to risk absolutely everything to build a life with you." I looked at my younger sister, the eternal golden child, who had spent her entire existence shielded from the harsh consequences of her own terrible actions. She was fiercely, blindly defending the very man who had stolen her mother's home, completely blinded by her desperate, pathetic need to maintain her flawless social media image at any cost. She truly, deeply believed that Kendrick had sacrificed his morals out of a deep, passionate love for her and their shared future together. I slowly closed the heavy leather binder, the sharp snapping sound cutting through her hysterical cries. I let out a long, heavy sigh, looking at the two of them standing there in their delusions. I shook my head slowly from side to side, feeling a cold, electrifying rush of anticipation for the absolute grand finale I had prepared. "Are you sure about that, Jasmine?" I turned away from my sister and walked purposefully toward the large outdoor television screen securely mounted on the back wall of the house. It was currently streaming a highly anticipated college football game, the volume respectfully muted so it would not interrupt Kendrick's grand performance on the patio. I reached into the deep side pocket of my leather tote bag and pulled out a small silver USB drive. The entire patio watched my every movement in stunned, breathless silence. They were completely paralyzed by the rapid, catastrophic shift in power dynamics they had just witnessed. I located the media port on the side of the flat screen and plugged the digital drive directly into the television panel. I picked up the heavy plastic remote control resting on the glass patio table and pressed the source button, switching the input from the live sports broadcast to my personal media file. The massive screen immediately went pitch black for 2 agonizing seconds before a crisp, high-definition video recording began playing loudly through the exterior surround sound speakers. The digital date and timestamp glowing brightly in the bottom right corner clearly showed the footage was recorded just last Tuesday afternoon. This was the exact same day Kendrick was aggressively calling my office, demanding $25,000 for a honeymoon he falsely claimed was in jeopardy. The camera angle was steady and incredibly clear, capturing a bustling, brightly lit environment filled with travelers rolling expensive suitcases. It was the premium first-class ticketing counter located inside the international terminal of the Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. The private investigator I hired had utilized a highly sophisticated concealed camera system to follow Kendrick's every single movement through the massive airport concourse, ensuring absolutely no detail was missed or obscured from clear view. On the brilliant outdoor screen, Kendrick appeared wearing his signature designer sunglasses, a tight-fitted linen shirt, and an expensive-looking gold watch he had likely purchased using stolen funds. He was projecting the absolute image of a wealthy, successful entrepreneur preparing for an exotic, luxurious vacation. He leaned casually against the pristine marble ticketing counter, confidently sliding a very thick, heavy stack of $100 bills across the surface toward the uniformed airline agent. The cash was undeniably the money he had successfully extorted from his dangerous underground bookies by draining my mother's remaining home equity. He was using Valerie's financial ruin to fund a lavish international getaway. However, as the camera slowly panned backward to capture the entire scene, a horrifying reality was instantly revealed. Kendrick was not standing at that premium airport counter by himself. A beautiful, heavily perfumed young woman was standing right directly beside him. The woman had both of her arms wrapped securely around Kendrick's waist. She was pressing her body intimately against his side, resting her head affectionately on his broad shoulder. As the ticketing agent finished counting the massive pile of cash, the mysterious woman turned her face directly toward the hidden camera lens. The collective horrifying gasp that instantly erupted from the backyard patio was so incredibly loud it nearly drowned out the audio playing from the television speakers. It was Tia, Jasmine's absolute best friend since college, her devoted sorority sister, the very same maid of honor who had stood right next to her at the grand church altar just 1 week ago, dabbing away fake tears of joy. The camera zoomed in perfectly as the smiling airline agent handed Kendrick 2 glossy boarding passes across the marble counter. The high-quality parabolic audio was captured completely and utterly flawlessly. 2 first-class tickets to the Maldives, sir, the agent announced cheerfully through the television speakers. Kendrick smiled broadly, proudly taking the expensive tickets and turning immediately toward Tia. He aggressively grabbed her by her slender waist, pulled her flush against his chest, and kissed her. It was absolutely not a friendly, innocent peck. It was an incredibly deep, passionate, undeniably romantic kiss that lasted for several agonizingly long seconds on the giant screen. "I cannot wait to get you on that beautiful beach, baby," Kendrick said clearly in the video, his hand resting firmly on Tia's lower back. The video continued to play on a loop, but absolutely no one in the backyard was paying any attention to the television anymore. The entire patio instantly exploded into pure, unbridled, catastrophic chaos. The pristine facade of the perfect African-American family was violently shattered into a million tiny broken pieces. Jasmine let out a sound that I have never heard a human being make before in my entire life. It was a raw, primal, deeply guttural shriek of absolute soul-crushing agony. Her legs completely gave out beneath her trembling body. She collapsed heavily onto the hard stone patio, tearing wildly at the fabric of her expensive designer sundress. She sobbed so violently that her shoulders shook uncontrollably, gasping desperately for air as the magnificent, flawless delusion she had sacrificed her own mother to protect was ruthlessly burned to ashes right in front of her. The judgmental aunties who just moments ago were demanding my complete submission were now shrieking in sheer horror. Aunt Shirley dropped her plate of ribs onto the grass, clutching her chest and crying out to the Lord for mercy. The church members scrambled backward completely and entirely terrified by the massive scale of Kendrick's betrayal. Over by the large beverage cooler, the tight-knit circle of sorority sisters aggressively parted ways. They stepped rapidly and forcefully away from Tia, as if she were suddenly infected with a highly contagious, deadly disease. Tia was actually standing right there at the barbecue, wearing a bright yellow floral dress and holding a red plastic cup filled with sweet lemonade, the color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. Her perfectly manicured hands began shaking so violently that she dropped the cup. The lemonade splashed violently across the patio stones. Realizing she was now the primary target of an angry mob of betrayed black women, Tia immediately turned on her high heels. She made a desperate, frantic, panicked dash toward the tall wooden security gate located at the very back edge of the yard, hoping to escape the explosive and dangerous family drama unnoticed. She did not make it very far. Cousin Jamal, a massive, fiercely protective man who had absolutely no patience for homewreckers, stepped directly into her escape path. He crossed his thick, muscular arms tightly over his broad chest, his face completely hardened into an impenetrable wall of pure righteous fury. "Where exactly do you think you are going?" he demanded, his deep voice booming powerfully over the chaotic screams of the terrified aunties. Tia desperately tried to dart around his right side, but two other angry female cousins stepped up immediately beside him, completely blocking the only remaining exit. "You are absolutely not going anywhere today, you filthy snake," one of the cousins yelled loudly, pointing a sharp finger aggressively right into Tia's terrified face. Tia shrank backward in fear, covering her weeping face with her trembling hands, entirely trapped inside the yard with the family she had just betrayed. Valerie was still sitting absolutely frozen in her plastic lawn chair, staring blankly ahead at the chaotic scene unfolding before her. The sudden agonizing shock of losing her beloved grandmother's house and vividly witnessing her golden child's perfect marriage shatter simultaneously had effectively broken her mind. She could not speak. She could only rock slowly back and forth, completely catatonic. Pastor Davis was standing frozen near the porch stairs, shaking his head slowly back and forth, staring at Kendrick with an expression of profound, undeniable disgust. Kendrick was standing utterly paralyzed near the smoking grill. His panicked eyes darted wildly around the yard, taking in the screaming women, his sobbing wife rolling in the dirt, and his trapped mistress begging for mercy at the fence. The carefully crafted mask of the confident, righteous alpha male completely fell off instantly, revealing the pathetic, desperate fraud hiding securely underneath his tailored clothing. He looked wildly at the television screen, still looping the damning footage of his romantic airport kiss, and then he looked directly into my calm eyes. His sweating face violently contorted into a horrific mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You ruined my life," Kendrick screamed at me, his loud voice cracking with dangerous, violent hysteria. "You ruined absolutely everything today." He angrily dropped the heavy metal grilling tongs onto the grass and lunged straight toward me. He covered the short distance in 3 massive aggressive strides, his hands reaching out to grab my throat. But before he could even come close, Marcus, my highly trained security operative, moved with terrifying lightning speed. Marcus stepped seamlessly between us, grabbing Kendrick by his expensive linen shirt and twisting his arm sharply. Marcus easily swept Kendrick's legs, driving him face first into the grass with a heavy thud, as approaching sirens wailed loudly. The wail of the sirens grew deafeningly loud. Flashing red and blue lights violently illuminated the thick afternoon humidity, casting long, frantic shadows across the manicured lawn. 2 heavily marked Atlanta Police Department cruisers aggressively hopped the curb, tearing up the pristine edge of my mother's front yard. Right behind them, A sleek, unmarked black SUV with federal plates pulled sharply into the driveway, completely blocking the entrance. The heavy vehicle doors swung open in perfect unison. Four uniformed city police officers and two plainclothes federal agents stepped out, their hands resting instinctively on their duty belts as they quickly assessed the chaotic scene unfolding in the backyard. The church members parted in absolute terror, scrambling out of the way as the officers marched purposefully through the open wooden gate. Marcus did not flinch. He kept his knee firmly planted between Kendrick's shoulder blades, holding the struggling, gasping man completely immobilized against the dirt. Kendrick spat a mouthful of grass and turned his head sideways, glaring up at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving against the ground. "You cannot do this to me!" Kendrick rasped, his voice dripping with pure venom and desperation. "You cannot have me arrested just because I lost my temper. It was a minor altercation. I did not even touch you." I looked down at him, my expression entirely devoid of sympathy or fear. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, the heel of my designer shoe sinking slightly into the soft earth right next to his face. I leaned down, lowering my voice, so only he and the approaching federal agents could hear my exact words. "I did not call them for the assault, Kendrick," I said smoothly, my voice cold and clinical. "A simple assault charge would only keep you in the county jail for a weekend. I called them because defrauding the elderly out of $100,000 using electronic banking networks that cross state lines is a severe federal offense. I called them for wire fraud." The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing man wearing a dark windbreaker with the FBI logo printed boldly across the back, stepped up beside me. He looked at the thick black binder resting on the patio table, then looked down at the man pinned to the ground. "Are you Kendrick Washington?" the agent asked, his voice projecting unquestionable authority over the silent yard. Kendrick squeezed his eyes shut, refusing to answer, his bravado entirely crushed. The agent nodded to Marcus. "You can release him. We will take it from here." Marcus smoothly stepped back, allowing the two uniformed city officers to haul Kendrick forcefully to his feet. They aggressively twisted his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around Kendrick's wrists echoed like a gunshot across the quiet patio. The agent began loudly reciting his Miranda rights, detailing the specific federal charges of wire fraud, bank fraud, and elder financial abuse. The sheer humiliation of the moment was absolute and undeniable. Every single alpha male posturing tactic, every arrogant smirk, every loud boasting speech Kendrick had ever delivered to this family was entirely erased in a matter of seconds. He was no longer the successful cryptocurrency entrepreneur building a massive empire. He was a pathetic, crying criminal, being publicly shackled in front of the neighborhood, the church elders, and the aunties who had praised him just 10 minutes ago. Kendrick's knees buckled. He physically went limp, forcing the officers to drag him upright. He looked wildly around the yard, his face covered in dirt, sweat, and tears. He desperately searched for a single friendly face, a single person willing to defend him. His eyes locked onto my mother. "Valerie," he cried out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, embarrassing whine. "Valerie, please tell them. Tell them you gave me that money willingly. Tell them it was a business loan. You have to help me. I am your son-in-law. Please do not let them take me away." Valerie did not move a single muscle. She stared right through him, her eyes vacant and hollow, completely shattered by the devastating reality of his financial destruction. Seeing that my mother was entirely unresponsive, Kendrick turned his desperate, weeping face toward the ground. As the officers forcefully marched him across the grass, out the wooden gate, and toward the waiting federal vehicles, the flashing red and blue lights reflected off his tear-stained cheeks as they aggressively pushed his head down and shoved him into the back seat of the cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing his fate completely. I turned my attention away from the driveway and looked back at the center of the patio. Jasmine was still sitting in the dirt. Her pristine white designer sundress was ruined, stained with dark brown mud and spilled lemonade. The glamorous, highly curated Instagram life she had prioritized over her own family had been violently ripped away, leaving her with absolutely nothing but profound, inescapable public humiliation. She watched the police cars pull away, her mouth open in a silent scream, her entire body shaking with violent, uncontrollable sobs. She reached her hand out toward the group of sorority sisters, huddled near the beverage cooler, silently begging for someone to comfort her, to help her up, to tell her everything was going to be all right. But the sisterhood she had valued so highly suddenly dissolved. Her friends exchanged highly uncomfortable, judgmental glances. Without saying a single word, they turned their backs on her. They quietly gathered their expensive purses and began marching out of the backyard one by one, eager to distance themselves entirely from the catastrophic scandal that was about to rock the Atlanta high society rumor mill. Jasmine was left entirely alone on the grass, a broken, shattered golden child, mourning the sudden death of her beautiful, fabricated reality. The heavy, suffocating silence in the yard was broken only by Jasmine's pathetic weeping. The church elders, including Pastor Davis, quietly excused themselves, slipping out the back gate with their heads bowed in deep shame. Aunt Shirley and the other judgmental relatives gathered their belongings in awkward silence, completely unable to look me in the eye. They had loudly demanded my submission, and I had served them an absolute masterclass in dominance. They realized they had backed the wrong side of the war, and they retreated rapidly, leaving only my immediate family standing amidst the wreckage. Valerie slowly stood up from her plastic lawn chair. She looked 10 years older than she had when I first walked through the gate. Her posture was completely defeated. Her shoulders slumped forward under the crushing weight of her massive financial failure. She walked slowly across the patio, her steps heavy and uncertain, until she stood directly in front of me. She looked up, tears streaming freely down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Simone," she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine raw terror. "Simone, I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong about him. He manipulated me. He told me exactly what I wanted to hear, and I was foolish enough to believe every single lie." She reached out with shaking hands, desperately trying to grab my arms, but I took a firm step backward, keeping a rigid physical distance between us. Valerie dropped her hands to her sides, sobbing openly. "Please, Simone," she begged, dropping all of her pride and arrogance. "Please do not kick me out of my house. It is the only thing I have left in this world. Your grandmother worked her entire life to buy this property. I know I treated you terribly. I know I failed you as a mother. But please, I am begging you on my hands and knees, do not make me homeless. Have mercy on me." I stood perfectly still on the freshly cut grass, holding my expensive leather tote bag in one hand and the absolute fate of my family in the other. I looked down at Valerie, a woman who had spent 33 years constantly tearing me down to elevate a sister who was currently rolling in the mud, crying over a convicted fraudster. I looked at the beautiful brick house behind her, the property I now owned free and clear, secured by my own massive corporate wealth. The power dynamic had completely and permanently shifted. They had tried to push me out, tried to shame me, tried to strip me of my resources and my dignity. Instead, I had systematically dismantled their entire world, exposed their darkest secrets, and claimed total ownership over their physical reality. The toxic foundation of our family was entirely destroyed, leveled to the ground by hard evidence and federal warrants. I held the absolute power of ruin or salvation right in the palm of my hand. I stared at my weeping mother and my broken sister, the warm Georgia wind blowing softly across the silent patio, wondering exactly how I was going to use it. I looked down at the woman who spent my childhood making me feel unwelcome. Valerie knelt in the grass, hands clasped in desperate prayer, waiting for me to bestow the unconditional forgiveness she never offered me. She expected me to drop to my knees, wrap my arms around her, and promise everything would go back to normal. But the old Simone, the desperate daughter who bought expensive gifts to earn her mother's affection, was dead. I stood perfectly straight, radiating unyielding authority. "You can stay in the house, Valerie. I said, my voice devoid of warmth. The relief washing over her face was palpable, but I did not let her enjoy it. However, things are going to change. You are no longer the matriarch. You are a tenant. Tomorrow morning, a representative from my property management company will arrive with a standard residential lease agreement. You will sign it. You will pay fair market rent directly to my corporate holding account on the first day of every single month. You will be responsible for all utilities and general maintenance. I paused. If your rent is even one day late, Valerie, you will be served with an eviction notice. There will be no grace periods. There will be no family discounts. And there will be no emergency bailouts. If you miss a single payment, you are out on the street. Do you completely understand the terms of your new living arrangement? Valerie stared at me in profound shock. She slowly nodded her head, her voice reduced to a barely audible whisper. I understand, Simone. Thank you. I turned away from my mother. I looked at Jasmine. She was sitting on the patio stones clutching her ruined dress. She looked up at me, her face a swollen tear-streaked mess. When she saw the cold way I handled our mother, a new desperation ignited in her eyes. Simone, Jasmine pleaded, her voice trembling as she tried to stand on shaky legs. Simone, please help me divorce him immediately. I need a high-powered attorney to protect me from the criminal investigations. Please loan me the money to retain a legal team. I promise I will pay you back. I just need you to save me. I stared at my younger sister, the golden child who spent her entire existence demanding the absolute best without lifting a finger to earn it. She actively participated in my public humiliation at the wedding just to elevate her own fragile ego. You made your choice, Jasmine, I said, my voice hard as a diamond. You willingly chose the shiny fake image over the harsh truth. You chose to blindly defend a degenerate gambler because he bought you an expensive dress and promised you a penthouse he could not afford. You wanted the glamorous lifestyle so desperately that you completely ignored every red flag staring you in the face. I shook my head, feeling zero pity for the wreckage of her life. I am not your personal bank, and I am certainly not your savior. You wanted to be a successful married woman living in the fast lane. Now you get to experience the crash. You figure it out. Jasmine opened her mouth to argue, but the harsh, undeniable finality in my eyes completely silenced her. She slumped back down onto the patio, burying her face in her dirty hands, finally realizing the endless well of my financial generosity was permanently dried up. I adjusted the strap of my designer leather tote bag and turned my back on the two of them. I began walking slowly across the freshly cut grass, heading straight toward the wooden security gate. The remaining aunties and church members immediately scrambled out of my way. The collective energy in the backyard had shifted drastically. The venomous whispers of condemnation that greeted me when I arrived had completely vanished. In their place was a heavy silence built entirely on absolute respect and profound fear. Aunt Shirley, the loudest and most critical voice in the family, pressed her back firmly against the wooden fence, lowering her eyes submissively to the ground as I walked past her. They finally realized exactly who they were dealing with. I was no longer the outcast they could easily bully. I was the absolute apex predator of the family. I pushed the wooden gate open and stepped out onto the quiet suburban street. The Georgia humidity felt strangely refreshing. I walked over to my black Porsche Panamera, the sleek metal gleaming under the late afternoon sun. I slid into the plush leather seat, closing the heavy door with a solid thud that blocked out the faint sounds of my family's misery. I placed my hands on the steering wheel, taking a long, incredibly cleansing breath. My mind drifted back to the grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton. I thought about the premium open bar and the massive $80,000 check I had written to fund the spectacular charade. To anyone else, losing that much money on a wedding for a sister who hated me and a groom who was a convicted federal criminal would seem like a catastrophic financial tragedy. But as I sat there in the quiet luxury of my car, I smiled. It was not a loss at all. It was an investment. That $80,000 was the absolute cheapest price I could have ever paid to forcefully expose the toxic parasites feeding on my life. It bought me the ultimate undeniable truth. It bought me the complete and utter destruction of my family's manipulative power over my emotions. Most importantly, it bought me my permanent, untouchable freedom. I started the engine, the powerful mechanical roar vibrating perfectly through the cabin. I shifted the car into drive and pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving my grandmother's house and the shattered remnants of my toxic family entirely in the rearview mirror. I drove off into the vibrant, beautiful Atlanta sunset, completely unbothered and absolutely victorious. The greatest lesson from this story is that blood does not always equal family, and loyalty should never cost you your peace or your financial security. For years, Simone tried to buy the love and respect of her toxic mother and entitled sister, only to realize that parasites will simply drain you until there is nothing left. True empowerment comes from setting unbreakable boundaries and walking away from people who only value you for what you can provide. Sometimes the most painful betrayals are absolutely necessary to force us to finally choose ourselves over our abusers. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own sanity? Let me know your experiences in the comments below, and please hit that like and subscribe button for more empowering stories just like this one.